Hey everybody, we got a great episode coming up for you this week as our Superboy coverage continues to unfold. We'll be taking a look at the unaired 1961 television pilot for The Adventures of Superboy. We had a wonderful conversation. I was joined by Zach Moore from Always Hold On to Smallville. I'm really excited for you to hear our conversation. Before that though, I just wanted to take a step back and address the fact that we had the first look at David Cornsweet in costume from James Gunn's 2025 Superman movie. I know that all of us Superman fans have been buzzing about this. A lot of our pals in podcasting released reaction episodes right after. In fact, I was fortunate enough to be on one of them. I joined Zach on Always Hold On to Smallville to share our initial gut reactions. I hope that folks had a chance to listen to that episode. If not, please check it out when you can. But I just wanted to say that I don't want to leave the Digging for Kryptonite audience hanging here. So make sure you come back next week. We're going to be continuing with our Superboy coverage. In fact, we'll be looking at Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, the comic book series from the Bronze Age. But at the top of the episode, we will have a special segment where we talk all about the costume reveal for Superman 2025. Now that the dust has settled after a couple of weeks, it'll be interesting to talk about it and break it all down. So if you were looking for some Superman 2025 costume discussion here on Digging for Kryptonite, make sure you come back next week. Also, speaking of things to look forward to, and keeping with our theme of lost unaired DC pilots, Zach also joins me on this month's episode of Beyond Metropolis Touring the DCU as we discuss the unaired 2006 Aquaman pilot from the producers of Smallville and starring Justin Hartley. It was a really fun, thorough discussion as we broke down that pilot, talked about the parallels with Smallville, but also where it diverged, and ultimately why it's a shame that that project didn't move forward because it had a lot of potential. So if you've had any interest or curiosity in the Aquaman pilot, whether you've watched it or not, I really think you'll enjoy our conversation. So that drops this Friday on my Patreon page as the latest edition of Beyond Metropolis. And now, this week's Digging for Kryptonite. The Adventures of Superman when he was a boy. For decades, Clark Kent's history as Superboy, both in Smallville and the future with the Legion of Superheroes, was a cornerstone of the Superman mythology. Despite being erased from comics continuity twice, the concept of Clark as Superboy has endured in various ways across time and media. It also represents the largest unexplored piece of my Superman fandom. Until now. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superboy fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss the unaired 1961 pilot for The Adventures of Superboy is the host of Always Hold On to Smallville, returning guest, Zach Moore. Welcome back.
I'm Clark Kent, and you're in Smallville.
I love it. It's amazing. You have now spent years and countless hours dissecting the Smallville television series on your podcast. But just think, there's an alternate reality out there where you also have 10 seasons of The Adventures of Superboy to discuss. Can you believe it?
Maybe 4, right? Because that seems to be the cutoff. As you yourself have started discussing, like it seems to be Smallville is the exception. But 4 seasons of The Adventures of Superboy from the 80s, and 4 seasons of Lois and Clark, and 4 seasons of Superman and Lois, and The Adventures of Superman. There are 6 seasons, but it's kind of like 4 volumes, if you will. So 4 is the magic number. But yes, there might have been, we could say there might have been 4 episodes in the 60s. And then someone would have started a podcast, maybe you. I don't know.
Maybe. It would certainly be a natural follow-up to my current George Reeves Adventures of Superman podcast. So yes, had this show gone to series, sure, we could have gone down that road. So we're talking about this pilot for a live-action half-hour Superboy television series that was spearheaded by longtime DC Comics editor and Adventures of Superman producer Whitney Ellsworth. It starred John Rockwell. A pilot was filmed in 1961. It never went to series, but we're here to break it all down for everyone. And before we get into the specifics of it, I'm curious because I don't know that you and I have really talked about this. When did you first even learn about this Superboy show that almost was?
I feel like in one of these reference books I have or something, I always remember like a couple of black and white pictures of like this guy is Superboy. I couldn't tell you when, right? A magazine, a book, maybe. I felt like it was something physical though. Like I feel like I was turning a page and I saw this. And then, of course, you get in the age of the internet and everything is a link to something else. But, back when we were younger, you didn't have that, right? You had your star logs and you had your books you check out of the library and stuff. And I feel like it was something like that. So I always quote unquote, but I've had an awareness of this for several years. But I didn't watch it until you asked me to be on this podcast, Anthony.
Oh, so this was the first time you watched? I had a feeling that might be the case, but I wasn't sure. Oh, fascinating. Okay, so not unlike yourself, I guess, I can't pinpoint exactly when I learned about this. At a minimum, a few years ago on this podcast, Rich Roney came on and we did 2 episodes on Adventures of Superman starring George Reeves. And for preparation, I binged the first 2 seasons of that show, a bunch of the color episodes. I rewatched Hollywoodland. I came across the Superboy pilot, so it was kind of a swirl of material at the time. But that's when I first watched it, and I think that's when I first learned about it, unless I had some kind of passing awareness from one of the sources like you were talking about. But I couldn't say for sure. But this is only the second time that I watched it. The first time I watched it, I found it on YouTube because I foolishly didn't realize that it is included on the bonus features for Smallville, the complete series on both DVD and Blu-ray. If you get either one of those sets, you have a copy of this lost pilot. But at the time, I didn't realize I watched it on YouTube. And then I was looking for it on YouTube again because I was going to say to our audience now, hey, if you don't have the Smallville set, go on YouTube. You can watch it. I couldn't find it.
I went through a similar journey. So we talked about doing this. I'm like, oh, I know this. I know I have this. I know this is a special feature on one of these Superman things I have. And so I you know what? I think it's on the Superman anthology set, from the DVD or the Blu-ray. So I open that up and I'm flipping through it. I'm like, which disc is it on? And it's not. They have Adventures of Super Pup there. And I was like, you know what? Still haven't watched that. Probably won't for a long, long time. Where can I find this? Oh, you know what? It's on Smallville. So I pulled it up from my Smallville Blu-rays. So the Smallville Blu-rays are fun because they have the 10 seasons on DVD and they have this little slip of 2 extra DVD discs. Oh, excuse me. They have the 10 seasons on Blu-ray. I think I said DVD. And the 10 seasons on Blu-ray. And then they have this extra little slip of 2 DVD discs, which have a bunch of standard definition bonus material, like the Aquaman pilot, for example. Also the Superboy pilot. And I said, oh, okay, good, I have it. Let me put it in my DVD player. And it starts, and it's in this little TV box, Anthony. It's in this TV box.
Uh-huh.
And if, for the listeners, imagine clip art. Imagine just a clip art 1950s television. And I thought, oh, this is cute. This is probably just for the intro or something. No, the entire episode is inside this little clip art TV inside your own TV. And I don't know why they chose to do that. So then I watched it like, you know what? I'm on this podcast. We're going to talk in depth about it. Let me be extra prepared. Let me go watch it again. But if I do, I'm going to go watch it like on YouTube or something so I can see it full screen. And then I go to YouTube. I look all these links, but Warner Brothers has removed it from YouTube. So that link that you said you watched years ago probably is the same link. It's just been removed by Warner Brothers. So I only watched it once. I only watched it on the DVD and I only watched it inside that clip art TV box. And that's where I'm coming from today.
I hear you and I share your frustration. And before we even get to that clip art TV box, how much of a struggle did you go through to just get that disc out of that little bonus case? Because it's not an easy feat.
You know what? I'm still a physical media guy. I collect a lot of physical media. I gotta say, it wasn't easy, but it's easier than some of these other discs these days where I feel like I'm gonna break the disc in half getting it out of the thing. And this one you had to kind of wedge it out because you really wedge it in there. This little slit pocket. Yeah, the struggles we go through for our fandom, Anthony, let me tell you.
I know, but I had a similar reaction where it came on the screen and I saw the image in that television box. And same as you, I was like, oh, it's probably just for the intro. And it wasn't. And the only thing I can surmise is that the quality is so low, so poor, that making it that small was the best way to present it. I don't know. It was a little distracting, though. I won't lie.
It's like they themselves downloaded it off YouTube. in like 360 or something. And we're like, we can't put this on a disc. I'm like, it's a DVD though. It's not even a Blu-ray. So it's standard F. So it must be, that was my thought as well. It's like, it's gotta be so low quality. But then I thought, surely they filmed this on film. It's 1961. There was no videotape in 1961. So who knows what, copy of a copy we are watching. Maybe this is from a bootleg at one of these conventions they were talking about in the book that I'm sure we'll reference a few times today.
Yes. So perfect segue. There is a book that proved to be a tremendous resource. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't give credit where credit's due. So TV historian Chuck Harder wrote a book called Superboy and Super Pup, The Lost Videos, the definitive look at two rare spinoffs from the classic TV series, The Adventures of Superman. Now, I picked up a copy of Harder's book within the past couple of years when I started doing my George Reeves Adventures of Superman rewatch podcast. And then one of our audience members, shout out to Lou Koza, very graciously sent me a package of stuff, including a copy of this book. And I was like, well, I already have this, but let me pay this forward. And someone who I think would appreciate it is you. And I was already kind of thinking about doing this episode. So I figured, all right, this will be great. So I sent it your way. But thank you to Lou for providing that additional copy. But this was really quite the treasure trove of production information and trivia and details, and really shed a lot of light. We'll get into this, but one of the most interesting facets of this book is that the final chapter contains summaries of the 12 written but unfilmed scripts. So Whitney Ellsworth didn't just write a pilot and film a pilot, but rather he, along with a trio of writers he collaborated with, they wrote 13 scripts such that if the show went to series, they'd be ready to go. They could hit the ground running. And of course, that proved not to be the case. But so there are these 12 unfilmed scripts, and then Harder summarized them at the end of the book. And we'll get to that later on. So you can we'll talk about what that first season of The Adventures of Superboy would have looked like. We actually have a very clear sense of that. So it's fascinating. But this book was great.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot to Lou and then to you for passing it on. It's now part of my collection. And it's like, when you're looking for, we have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to so many things these days. Like I have, as I mentioned on my own podcast, Always on Smallville, for the first 7 seasons, the Smallville, the official companion, season 1, available wherever books are sold. And I always say that. I kind of made it became a running joke when in the first season I started, I'm going to say it every time. And I feel bad now when people are like, oh, wherever books are sold, let me go out and find one. I'm like, it's not that easy. But to have an episode by episode guide is so helpful, right?
They're pounding the counter at Barnes and Noble. They're like, Zach Moore on this podcast, he said wherever books are sold, damn it.
I apologize if I've caused any unrest. But for shows like this and on Always on the Flash, which is another podcast I have about the 1990 Flash show. There was an issue of DC Comics, the all new Flash TV special #1. And it had a couple of original comics, and at the end, or like the second half of the whole book, is this similar to this, a treasure trove of production information, and that's it. That is the only published material that's ever going to talk about that show, much like this is the only published material that's ever going to talk about Superboy and Super Pup, the Lost Videos.
The Lost Videos. I was saying to you off mic, I don't know that I will ever get to an episode about Super Pup. I don't know. If we do enough episodes, I guess eventually you'll do it. But for now,
we've probably both said things like that before. We're like, well, I don't think I'll ever podcast about this. And then fast forward 5 years, you're sitting here talking about Super Pup.
I know.
A Super Pup fan journey.
Yeah, famous last words. But kind of on this note about how little information there is about this and how obscure this is, because I think this is fair to say this Superboy pilot is one of the more obscure pieces of Superman media. I would imagine that of the folks listening to this episode, there's probably a decent number who didn't even know this was a thing. Then there's probably another contingent who have heard about it but have never watched it. And then I would venture to say, an audience, correct me if I'm wrong, probably the smallest group is a group of people who have actually sought this out and watched it. And one of the things that I'm so excited about here is that we can shine a light on this. And for people who have the Smallville complete series, and why wouldn't you? But for people who have it, bust out those bonus features, watch it for yourself. But if you don't have
Anthony,
it, or
Anthony, it's available wherever Blu-rays are sold.
wherever Blu-rays are, which, I mean, these days is less and less places, unfortunately. Also, just as a random side note, I don't know that I ever talked about this on the actual podcast. I know I put up videos on social media about it, but I had such a journey to just get a correct copy of the complete series of Smallville on Blu-ray. I went through like 3 sets because I think this is the first 2 that I bought had duplicate discs. It was, I think, a season 6 disc was there.
I remember
twice.
this. You talked about this, yeah.
And I was
on social media, yeah.
And I was reaching out to our mutual friend Craig Byrne of Krypton Site and K-Site TV. I was like, "Do you have a contact at Warner Brothers? Is there someone I can talk to? How do I get the disc that I need?" And I ended up just sending it back to Amazon and just getting replacements until eventually I got a version of it that had the correct discs. But anyway, for people who have the complete series, bust out the special features, watch this for yourself. But if you don't have it, or you don't have the time, or you don't have the interest, we're going to take you through it and shine a light on it. And I've so been looking forward to this. I think this is going to be a really fun episode. I got to ask you a question, though, before we talk about the Superboy pilot, because in our kickoff episode to this Superboy event, one of the questions I posed to Rich Roney pertained to Smallville, and his experience with the show is fairly minimal. So since I have you here, and by the way, this is not the last time you and I are going to be talking about Smallville over the course of this event. So audience, stay tuned. But let me pose to you the question I posed to him, which is Smallville. Do you, or have you at any point, have you considered Smallville to be a Superboy show or a Superboy story?
No, I haven't. I feel like maybe my dad would call it, the Superboy show or something, right? Even though we watched Smallville together in its early years. I never thought of it as a Superboy show, just a young Superman show, a Clark Kent show. It was never, I mean, there was already the Superboy show. So I bet that probably helped my thinking. Like, well, that was that. This is not that. And he's not running around. Because to me, you say Superboy. Well, people our age, you say Superboy, you think, Death of Superman, Connor Kent. There's even more Superboys now, right? But the people older than us, like my dad, for example, it's like, oh yeah, young Clark is flying around in Superboy stuff, right? So depending on your generation or your entry point to these characters, I could see why you would think, you would classify Smallville as a Superboy show. Me personally, no, it was always just Superman.
Same. No, I am similarly aligned. That's been my take on it as well, and how I've always viewed the show. Another question that I posed to Rich that I want to renew now, it's particularly relevant here as we talk about the Superboy pilot, because this pilot was the first, or would have been the first, adaptation of Superboy in other media. So Superboy debuts in the comics in late 1944, is not included in the Kirk Alyn movie serials or in the George Reeves Adventures of Superman series. And in 1961, we're still a few years removed from the Filmation Superboy animated shorts that would air as part of those series on CBS. And of course, after that, I think most notably, you have the Christopher Reeve movie series that also omitted the Superboy chapter in this story. And so the question that I had brought up a couple of episodes ago that I want to renew now and get your take on, to whatever extent you have one. I mean, the fact that you have these major live action adaptations during a period of time where Superboy exists and is part of the comics continuity and is part of Clark Kent's history, what, if anything, and maybe the answer is nothing, but like, what, if anything, do you make of the fact that the Kirk Alyn serials, the George Reeves series, and the Christopher Reeve movie series all chose to jump over Superboy and go straight from Clark to Superman?
It's interesting, right? It almost makes those things more timeless, because now there is no Superboy in his history. I mean, for the most part, right? That's a whole rabbit hole that you're going to be exploring in this.
Yeah, that's debatable. I would argue that as of right now, in current DC Comics continuity, it is following Doomsday Clock. I genuinely think that Superman's Secret Origin is the de facto official origin. I could be proven wrong, and I'm going to actually try to get an answer from DC. So stay tuned on that. But anyway,
yeah, it's so interesting. It's a logical thing to cut. Like, it's the first thing I would cut. It's like, hey, what would you change about Superman? I'm like, well, you cut out the Superboy stuff because it's like if he's running around in Smallville as it's Superboy and everybody knows Clark Kent's there, and then he moves to Metropolis and he's running around as Superman and everybody knows Clark Kent's there. It takes people 5 seconds to figure out who is who. Like look at Clark on Smallville. It's debatable enough because he has no disguise and he has the glasses and that's its own conversation. But like at least that's like, hey, mysterious things were happening and now mysterious things are still happening, but it's a mysterious world. So who knows, right? Instead of like, here's this guy who looks just like this other guy doing all these super things and it's suspicious. And you transpose that to his adulthood. So I could only imagine, maybe we're overthinking like people in a boardroom in 1950 or in then 1977 or whatever, right? When they're making George Reeves or Christopher Reeve movies and TV shows. That maybe we're overthinking it, but I think they're like, it's a much cleaner hero's journey if you remove that, right? Because I think one of the things Rich mentioned in you guys' conversation, which I listened to, it was great. Like it to have him be a fully formed superhero with like all his powers, like what is the hero's journey here? Like you can't. It's like starting a video game with all of the without unlocking anything. You got to earn your powers and things like that, right? So I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if like part of the thinking was this is dumb. This is for kids. We have to take it out. I don't think that's what it was. I think it was like, well, we're telling a hero's journey here, especially with Superman, the movie, for example, like that. I totally understand why that was removed. Now the George Reeves show, who knows, right? I mean, they weren't interested in that, right? Really, they just kind of like, and now he's in Metropolis, right? So, and then the Kirk Allen show, I mean, the serials, like, I don't know, they were movies here. That's a whole other thing, right? So I don't know, man. Like, but it's very interesting that these three very different versions of this character chose to remove this pretty essential part of his history. That's great. 1944, you said?
Yeah, it was the very end. It was November 1944 that Superboy debuts. So,
right. I mean, that's when I was younger. Like I have an interesting history with Superboy, I guess, because a lot of my comic book knowledge of these things comes from inheriting my dad's collection. He just gave them to me, like, here's my comic, son, right? And he was a big Superboy fan, and Adventure Comics was his favorite with the Legion of Superheroes. So I got a lot of these comics when I was a kid, or was just reading them. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I just never really I didn't like, okay, cool. Oh, that's kind of fun. He's a kid running around. That's kind of neat. Right. And that's it. That's like the extent of my thinking about it. Right. So, and I guess I always assume, oh, this is some goofy thing they invented in the 60s, right? For like kids. But no, it's crazy to me that this is an essential part. I don't think people our age can really appreciate the fact that this was part of the character's history for like 40 years. Right. And then just gets erased. And so I understand because I can kind of put myself in the mindset of other fandoms I have. And be like, if you told me that and like, we're taking this out, I'd be like, what? How dare you? Right.
Absolutely. And like, that's one of the main reasons why I've been so curious about this chapter in the character's history and why we're doing this event, because it was such a substantial piece of the mythology and added so much to the mythology. And then it was just jettisoned for such a long time. And even when it was brought back, not a ton was really done with it in the nearly 2 decades since. So it's fascinating. I find it fascinating. Hopefully the audience is as well. But kind of on that note, like, let's talk about this 1961 pilot, which was written by Whitney Ellsworth and Vernon Clark. Vernon Clark also wrote a bunch of the Filmation Superboy shorts, which I've recently been watching. Very fascinating as well. And directed by George Blair, who helmed 27 episodes of Adventures of Superman. So we also have behind the scenes special effects guru Cy Simonson, who was involved with this Superboy pilot in a more limited capacity than he was on Adventures of Superman, but he was involved in this. So behind the scenes, you do have a number of folks who were part of the George Reeves Adventures of Superman series. And just to put this into context, this pilot was filmed in 1961. Adventures of Superman, starring George Reeves, aired what would be its last season in 1958. As I think fans are well aware, the plan was for the show to come back for another season. But of course, tragically, George Reeves passed away in 1959 before production could begin on this new season. And so this is another thing that I think fans are clued into here, because it's been discussed a lot, that there were a number of attempts to try to keep the Adventures of Superman franchise alive. I think the one that's been really talked about is an attempted Jimmy Olsen series, right? Jack Larson, who portrayed the character, has talked about how after George passed, there was this notion of doing a Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen series where Superman would be represented through a stunt double and stock footage of George Reeves, and Jack Larson passed feeling that this was ghoulish. And I don't disagree.
Yeah, I totally agree with him. Yeah, if this is like your friend who died, like I would not be comfortable with that. But you hear about that, and I'm like, wow, that's like how they represent Superman on Supergirl in season 1. You know, there's some boots over here and a special effect over there. It's just thinking about that. Like I totally understand they're like, oh God, what do we do? Like, it's a highly successful show and they had just renewed it. Like I get the attempt. So between that and Super Pup and then this, you totally understand why they were trying to figure out a way to keep this train going, right?
Yes. And given the comics and at the time and all of that, and Jack Larson's role as Jimmy on Adventures of Superman, a Superman's pal show does make sense on paper. But I think it's, again, the insertion of Superman via the stunt double and stock footage. That's where it gets weird, and we all kind of have a bad feeling about it. I think if it just really divorced itself from Superman, maybe if it had included Supergirl, for argument's sake, something like that would give it its own spin, I think that could have worked. But obviously that wasn't the case, and Larson passed, and I think all of us as fans are grateful that he did. But then there was this attempt in 1961, again, led by Whitney Ellsworth. And so, again, he commissions these 13 scripts, and they film a pilot for the episode called Raja's Ransom. And that's the one that we'll be discussing here. The only one that there is to discuss.
Yeah, the only one to discuss. Yeah.
It's the only one. And according to the book, Whitney Ellsworth, it was his call which one to choose to film as the pilot. And apparently this was done fully on spec. There was no commitment from the network. But of course, this was meant to entice and to lead to a series. Again, we'll get into all of the specifics of it, but it starred John Rockwell. And one of the things that's mentioned in the book, and I think you see this on screen, as tough as it is to kind of decipher what's going on in that like tiny little box here, but Rockwell did possess this natural athleticism. And so rather than jumping off of that springboard to take off like George Reeves did, he just jumped over the camera, right? So there was this natural athletic ability that he possessed. We could talk about this more when we get into the episode, but anything about Rockwell that stood out to you from what you watched or what you read about him in the book?
Well, yeah, a couple things. He kind of had like I think I was familiar with James Bond. He's had kind of a George Lazenby journey to the character. He was like, "Yo, yeah, like I could do this. Like I'm not an actor for sure." Like, and then so that's when Sean Connery left the role of James Bond. George Lazenby was his first replacement, and so he went and got like a haircut and a suit and showed up at the offices of the people who made James Bond movies. He's like, "Hey, I'm your guy," and they're like, "Okay, sure." And it was kind of the same thing with John Rockwell here. Also, if they were ever going to make a prequel show to The Adventures of Superman, with George, and there was going to be a younger George Reeves, I don't know, John Rockwell really could fit the part, right? He's got the way he moves, he's got the energy to him, which the early Adventures of Superman episodes have with George Reeves. Like, I don't know, like I kind of bought this. Like, I don't think there was ever any sort of intention of this to be a true prequel, if you will, to that show, but I could have bought him as a younger version of that guy on the other show. So I think this was a solid choice, and assumably, and he even says himself in this book, "Hey, I would have gotten better as an actor," and he probably would have, right? This is the first thing he'd done, right?
That's one of the things I'll talk about this more when I do our cast breakdown. But for a number of the key roles in this was one of only a very few credits that a lot of these performers had. They didn't do a ton else beyond this, but I liked him in this as well. I guess the thing that stood out to me from reading the book was that apparently he had been a lifeguard at some point, and he saved Hugh Hefner.
Yes.
And ended up living at the Playboy Mansion off and on during the 1970s. It's just a fun bit of trivia here about Superboy star John Rockwell. And here's the other thing too. and I had messaged you about this. Whenever there are these discussions about the best actors to wear the cape, you'll often have the Superboy TV series fans, friends of ours, who will chime in and say, hey, don't forget John Hames Newton and Gerard Christopher, and rightfully so, right? They're part of this conversation. They should be part of this conversation. But I say to you, Zach, where are the people demanding justice for John Rockwell Superboy?
I think it's fine. I think look, no offense to the guy. He was fine in this, okay? Kirk Allen is at the bottom, and he's right the next step above him as far as live action people to wear a Superman costume. That's just my opinion. Like,
fair enough. So you're saying that in the Flash movie, when Barry was in that Chrono Bowl or whatever we were talking about, and we had all of these digital recreations of past DC characters, you didn't want to see John Rockwell Superboy there. Think about how that would have confused people. But then at the same time, I say to myself, would it have confused them any more than the Jay Garrick Flash that looked exactly like Teddy Sears, but actually wasn't, apparently?
Yeah, maybe that was the Earth that Flash was from. No. Talk about a deep cut, right? The John Rockwell would have been a deep cut.
John Rockwell. But yes, he is one of the folks, only for one unaired lost pilot, but one of the folks to wear the cape here. The book talks about the production of the pilot, and we'll talk about the story, of course. But I think what was most interesting to me was the discussion about why this series did not move forward. We'll share our thoughts on the pilot. I'm very curious to compare notes and to get your take. Did you enjoy it? Did you not? But for me, not to jump ahead, but I think there was a lot of potential here. I don't know how well the pilot really demonstrated that, but I think the pieces were in place. And you could definitely see this serving as a continuation of the George Reeves show, even if not officially, strictly a prequel. But the book talks about why this show didn't move forward, and they interview a bunch of folks. And essentially there are, I would say, three potential reasons, speculated reasons that are put forth why this did not become a series. One has to do with Kellogg's, which sponsored Adventures of Superman, which was still running and very popular in syndication at the time. And this idea that Kellogg's did not want this competing product out there at the time. So that's one reason. And I don't know. That makes perfect sense. When this corporate world we live in, I totally see that. But it's how upsetting is that the reason, right? Oh, competing cereal companies, because Wheaties was going to sponsor this show, and Kellogg's was like, oh no, Superman's our thing, right? Yeah, it is kind of heartbreaking if that's what it comes down to. There is also speculation that maybe the show would have been too expensive. And then the other reason that's put forth is that perhaps audiences, and this is so speculative, how would they have known unless they put the show out there and gave it a shot? But this idea that audiences were too hung up on George Reeves, essentially, that he was so indelible in the minds of viewers that putting forth this younger version portrayed by a different actor would have been so off-putting to them, I suppose, that they wouldn't have bought into it. What do you think of that? Well, I think history has proven that to be the case with Christopher Reeve, right? I mean, Christopher Reeve was Superman for a generation, and they never escaped his shadow for 20 years. And when they finally did, they cast Brandon Routh to play Christopher Reeve's Superman, thus extending that legacy on the big screen. Right. Obviously, there have been lots of animation and television shows in between now and then. But no, I think and as I've learned from listening to your show and getting more into the Adventures of Superman fandom, like there are people who are like, no, George Reeves is my Superman. Like I mentioned my dad a couple of times. Even him was like, oh, yeah, George Reeves is my Superman. I'm like, that's your guy. Right. So like I think that's smart to go younger, though. Like, it's not like here's a different guy. Like, I think that's the loophole that they were smart to do. I mean, they understood. Like, they're like, we're not gonna cast a different guy. I mean, even to go to the links of, I mean, you mentioned the Adventures of Jimmy Olsen show, right? Like, let's use stock footage of George Reeves. I'm like, they understood that, like, yeah, he's Superman to these people, right? So I think that's an unfair reason to not greenlight the show, because this was the loophole they needed to continue the character if they were going to do so. We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here, and there's one Smallville rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On To banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars. This episode made possible in part by educator, hobby comic book collector, and pop culture enthusiast Sam Lim. Sam is based in the South Jersey area and is looking to connect with other comics fans as well as retailers. They're also looking for comic shops to explore, so recommendations are welcome. Be sure to follow Sam on Instagram at SZL Comics to see their latest comic pickups and shop adventures. Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of two of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. Absolutely. And we've been touching on this idea of whether this would or could have been considered a prequel to the George Reeves show. So you came on my George Reeves rewatch podcast. We did Superman on Earth, the pilot, the origin story. And clearly in that episode, there's no Clark as Superboy in that. So I think if we're looking at this strictly looking at the continuity that we have established in the George Reeves television series, no, it doesn't fit. But again, you do have a lot of folks behind the scenes who are involved with the Reeves series working on the Superboy show, a similar aesthetic. This pilot was filmed in black and white. As we know, the George Reeves show initially filmed in black and white. Later, in a very forward-thinking move, they started filming the series in color, even though it wouldn't air in color for years to come. But all that being said, I don't know, do you, now having watched the pilot, do you feel like it would or could have been seen as a prequel, even though we recognize that, yes, there's a retcon involved, but does it feel in keeping enough where it's like, oh yeah, this actually could have been seen as of a piece with the Reeves series?
You know, I was curious if they were going to keep the same music, like da 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 da, and they didn't. I'm like, oh, okay, well that's a choice. But even the presentation at the beginning, like he's standing in space, I'm like, okay, that's what George Reeves did. So, and like you said, a lot of the behind the scenes people, you could, and I've thought this before, and I don't know if I've ever said this on a podcast, but like there's a weird thinking. You could say that, you know what, that Superboy TV show produced by the Salkinds, who made the Christopher Reeve movies and who produced the show, and all these behind the scenes people who worked on those movies, worked on that show. Does that show take place in between Jeff East and Christopher Reeve? Maybe, like with our comic book fan thinking, we can justify anything. So, because when you see Jeff East open that backpack, is that just the blankets, or is that a Superboy costume, Anthony? You tell me. Anyway, these are the fun rabbit holes we fall into as fans. And I'm sure you could justify this, because as if the George Reeves show had that great continuity to begin with. Right? Well,
I know the question that you raised about the Donner movie series and that 88 to 92 Superboy TV series, audience, put a pin in that, because we'll circle back to that question we get there, because I've been kind of kicking that around as well. And I think that's if nothing else, a very interesting question. So we're on the same page with that. And yeah, similarly here, right? The George Reeves show, not necessarily a slave to continuity. And again, you watch Superman on Earth, that first episode, and it does seem pretty clear that he did not have a costumed identity before Pa died. And as he's leaving Smallville, Ma gives him this costume for him to wear. But again, you can kind of do some gymnastics there and make it work. And I think that just from the one episode that we saw here, yeah, I mean, I think had this gone to series, had it been able to build out, and also not to skip ahead, but one of the episodes that was written but not filmed featured Professor Pepperwinkle.
That's all you need. That is the only hook you need as a fan to build this whole theory around it.
And a time traveling, or actually, well, yes, he's a time traveling Professor Pepperwinkle in that he takes Superboy through this journey through time. I don't know offhand if he shows up in Smallville through time travel or if he's just there in the present day as part of his regular timeline. I don't know. But either way, there is a connection point to the Adventures of Superman TV series. So I think that these could have worked together. Again, it's just fascinating to think about what could have been. All right, let's get into this. Raja's ransom. So here's the synopsis, and then we'll go through it more specifically. Clark and Lana's classmate, Jimmy Drake, is ashamed of his father's occupation as a doorman at the Smallville movie theater. But when criminals steal a valuable diamond display from the theater, Mr. Drake helps Superboy and the police apprehend the thieves, and Jimmy sees his father in a new light. What a heartwarming story.
Yeah.
So overall, before we get into kind of, and you and I talked about doing this kind of scene by scene, the way you and I do each of our rewatch podcasts, and we'll lay it out for everyone who hasn't seen this and might never see this. But overall, yeah, especially watching this for the first time, I'm very curious. What were your impressions of this?
Kind of a weak intro story, frankly. I mean, in a batch of 13, if this is one of them, sure. And that's what it was. They just picked this one. And the book kind of says, oh, it was probably a budgetary constraint too. I'm like, okay, I see that. But you know what? You got to lead with your strengths. And you kind of led with your mids here. I'm not saying it was terrible, but it's just like, like, I don't know, like maybe do the first appearance of Superboy. Maybe that might draw some people in and intrigue some people instead of just, hey, this kid feels bad. And I don't know. It's compare that to Superman on Earth, right? Which we did. Like that was like, hey, look at this. Like, I think we were both pretty impressed with what they showed us, right? And this being the first episode, like they're trying to sell a show here, Anthony, and they did not sell us or me. We'll hear what you say in a minute, but they did not sell the networks back in the 60s either.
Funny enough, reading the summaries of the 12 unfilmed scripts, not a single one is the debut of Superboy. So that was not, I guess, just not on their agenda to do the origin and the public debut. But I agree that would have been a natural starting point. I guess I had a similar reaction. And like I said, I had watched this once before on YouTube when it was available there. But it was part of this larger look at the Reeves series. And again, I don't know that I was really hyper-focused on the Superboy pilot. So this time I watched it twice. I took notes and I was really thinking about it. And I had the book. And I guess I feel the same way you do in that as a pilot, as hey, this is what we're trying to sell you. This is a representation of what this show can be. I don't think this was the best script to choose. Not for anything. One of the scripts that's summarized in the book, it has Mxyzptlk, and Superboy goes to the Old West. And like the book points out, and looking at this, you can see, I think that they were trying not to break the bank. And one of the reasons that's cited for picking this one is that Pa Kent is not included in this one. So they didn't have to worry about casting him. But it's one of those things where, look, going back to Smallville, the show that you and I love endlessly, amazing pilot. 3 out of 3 roses, some might say.
3 roses. Nothing's better than the pilot, Anthony. We know this.
Inside joke. But it's an amazing pilot. And then as you watch the first season of Smallville, in most episodes, there's some great stuff and great character moments. And there's something that you can really sink your teeth into and things that we remember from those episodes, specific instances, specific interactions, character beats and whatnot. But the plots of a lot of those early episodes, they were still figuring out what the show was going to be and all that. But that pilot was really something special. And that's generally, I think, what you would want to see from something like this. So looking at the Superboy pilot, kind of the same thing where I feel like you see the pieces are in place and it's a relatively faithful adaptation of the Superboy comics. Again, you don't see Pa Kent in this one, but you see Ma Kent and there's reference to Pa owning the Kent General Store. So that piece is there. Clark gets this notification from Chief Parker. The lamp flickers in the living room, and then he goes through the bookcase, and he's got his secret hideout, and he changes to a Superboy costume, and he exits through this tunnel under the house, and he emerges
And
from
that's
this
from the
folder.
comics, right?
All
I
from
seem to remember the tunnel under the house was a huge thing in the Superboy comics, right? Because they lived like in the suburbs.
exact. Yeah, it's not the farm that we're used to, but in the comics and the show, they're living in the neighborhood, and the Kents run the Smallville General Store, the Kent General Store, and you have the classroom setting. You have Lana there as a major supporting player. You've got Clark in the glasses, in the sweater vest. In the comics, it was typically the sweater. They went more with the sweater vest look, but still, like, it feels and looks like what you would be reading in the comics at the time. So there's a level of faithfulness, of fidelity to the source material there. Like, I think essentially the core components that you would want in a 1960s Superboy television series, I think they're there. I just don't think that the plot of Raja's Ransom was dynamic or compelling enough or Superboy focused enough to really sell this. Right?
Correct. I think, like, what are the biggest displays of power that Superboy has in this? Oh, he rips open a door. A car crashes into him. I mean, okay, but he was just standing there, so it's not that impressive. I don't. It's that's the thing, right? You don't be too hard on it because it's from 1961, right? Oh, 1961, Anthony Smallville.
Oh, yes. Wait, is that when Jor-El goes on his walkabout?
That's Relic. Which all the ads called Smallville 1961, and I always joke that episode is called 1961 for so long now. But that's like, there you go. Hashtag it's all connected. So, like, we are not gonna sit here and be like, you know what, that looked really fake. Like, that's not what we're complaining about. It's more like, look, y'all, you know your technical limitations, right? But you got to show us something that's going to sell us on it, you know. And that's where that is my biggest takeaway from this. Like, you could have picked something else to really get people excited about this instead of saying, oh, okay, we'll think about it. Thank you for your time. And that's ultimately, unfortunately, what happened to this show.
If you had said to me that this was a pilot for a show called The Adventures of Jimmy Drake, I would have said, oh, okay, cool.
he is the emotional arc in the show. Maybe, seriously though, right? This guy, Jimmy, maybe they thought, oh, we need a Jimmy because it's a Superman show. Let's call this kid Jimmy, because in the comic, well, let's talk about that, right? The kid's not named Jimmy, right? He got a different name. So I'm sure that was part of their thinking. Like, oh, it's Superman and Jimmy, right? And that is an interesting choice to have this character who knows if we ever see that guy again. Probably not, with how shows worked, right? But he's their friend at school and all this stuff. And anyway, yeah, it's just a Jimmy Drake. This is a heck of an adventure for him.
It is. You're right, though. That's the thing. And I'm glad you pointed this out. And in case anyone's like, oh, don't beat up on this unaired pilot. No, that's the thing. It really, I think, boils down to, like you said, that emotional arc. And the business of that in this pilot really does go to Jimmy Drake. And looking at the summaries of those unfilmed episodes, they're all, I feel like, vastly more Clark / Superboy centric.
Yeah.
So this was just kind of an odd choice. Like, we spend an inordinate amount of time in this pilot with the crooks who are stealing the diamond display, and with Jimmy Drake, this classmate who's ashamed that his father is a doorman. So for those reasons, I think it's a curious choice to pick this to be the pilot. Now, and this kind of gave me a little bit of peace about this. Because we're thinking about it as, hey, you're using this to try to sell the show. This might be why it didn't get picked up. But if any of the reasons cited in the book are the actual reasons why Kellogg's didn't want it, or there was this feeling that people were too attached to George Reeves, or it was too expensive,
then any show they would have produced then would have had the same result. Yeah.
Exactly. So I don't know that they could have done anything differently, really, that would have yielded a different result. I think at most it might have made for a meatier episode for us to talk about. But I don't know that either one of us would have an Adventures of Superboy rewatch podcast going at the moment. I could be wrong, but I don't think so.
I don't even have one for the 80s show. So
yeah. And I don't know if you ever would. I don't know. But we'll get there. You mentioned the comic, though. And this is such a fascinating little bit of business here.
Yes.
So the story presented in this pilot with this kid who's ashamed of his father, who's a mere doorman, and this diamond heist. It's nearly identical to an issue of Superboy. It's number 88 from April 1961. It's called The Saddest Boy in Smallville. Now, the book talks about how it's unknown who wrote the comic, and this was not uncommon at the time. A lot of these older comics, we don't always have accurate credits for the creative team. According to the trivia for IMDb, the with respect to the pilot, they cite Leo Dorfman and George Papp as the creative team for Superboy number 88. According to the book, it's unknown. So I don't know. I couldn't really say for sure who wrote and drew this comic, but it is almost beat for beat with a few differences. But again, definitely right around the same time. And the book speculates that it could have been Whitney Ellsworth himself who wrote both. But all that to say, long story short, I mean, essentially, it's kind of unclear whether the pilot was adapted from the comic or the pilot was adapted into the comic. But you have these two stories that are nearly identical. What was your reaction to the comic? I know I gave you a heads up about that. What was your reaction?
Yes. You know what? There were a couple things I was like, oh, okay, maybe that was a little better. But I am really glad they took out the part where Superboy goes back in time to get pictures of Jimmy's dad. Not Jimmy, different name.
Tommy. Yeah.
Tommy. He gets pictures of Tommy's dad in World War II to prove to him that his dad was cool and did cool stuff back in the day. Bizarre. But that's the kind of stuff that, like, that's why I think Superboy's like a Silver Age character where he's just all this crazy stuff. And you know, this is 61, but still, that was still, I don't know, but that's why it's so interesting to me. This character came out in 1944. Because when I think about this character, that's the kind of stuff let me go fly back in time for a picture and fly back and show you this thing. That honestly, that was the thing that stuck out to me the most about that comic.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think when you look at the real Superboy fans out there, and they're out there, and I've heard from them, since we're into this event, I posted on social media, like, what do you guys think? Should Clark as Superboy be part of the history of the mythology? And you might be shocked to learn people have strong opinions. And I think in terms of the reactions I've gotten, I think unsurprisingly, it stems so much from the era that people grew up in, not unlike ourselves. And so there really do seem to be these two major camps. I don't want to paint with a broad brush. There are definitely exceptions. I heard from one gentleman who grew up in the post-crisis era, but got really interested in Superboy, and now that's his jam, right? So there are always exceptions, but generally speaking, people who grew up in the post-crisis era, where this was not part of the character, and people who grew up with it, and you get very different opinions here. Like it's really kind of fascinating. But I think within the hardcore Superboy fandom, I think it's fair to say Silver Age Superboy is huge. And then in the Bronze Age, this is Silver as well, but especially in the Bronze Age, Superboy's adventures with the Legion of Superheroes, that's when we get into the Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes stretch of those comics. I think those are probably, and then of course the live action television series. I feel like those are kind of the major prongs of the Superboy fandom, is what I've sensed so far.
Well, we're a couple of guys who grew up on Smallville. We're like, oh, we're the same age as Clark Kent, right? So you understand the appeal to kids reading Superboy in the old days, because it's like, oh, I'm 11 and so Superboy, or what? I don't know how old Superboy is supposed to be. His age seems to fluctuate from story to story, but like that's the same thinking that made us. I mean, one of the many reasons why we're such big Smallville fans. Same thinking applies. It's like, hey, I'm growing up with this character. This is me right now. I can relate to this. Going to school. I'm going to school. That's. So, I mean, as much as I answered earlier, Smallville's not Superboy. Like, in a way, it is for them. I mean, it's not to us, but it is for them. So I understand the thing. Like, if you told me, like, I don't know, like Smallville's erased, I'd be like, no. Like, I would understand. Like, we're in this post-crisis world where stuff gets erased and reconstituted all the time. But like, if I don't know. I guess I'm so used to that's what's great about Superman. There's you're not like erasing Smallville when you erase, when he's not friends with Lex as a kid, and there's no Kawachi caves and there's no meteor shower. I'm like, okay, it's fine. But like when that was, Superboy was quote unquote canon, whatever canon is to a comic book character for 40 years. That's a lot of generations of kids growing up relating to this character. And then to tell them, that never happened. And then usually the first reason people say is, well, that's dumb, right? Like, of course you're going to get upset. So I relate. I can understand you guys out there. Personally, if my own Superman like mythology, I'd be like, I would leave that out, but I would make it, I think the loophole that Jeff Johns made where he's like in the future with the Legion in the costume, but not. And if he is in Smallville, he's like kind of running around in secret still, even if he has a costume. That is the perfect balance that I've come to. So I know we're getting all this non-pilot stuff now, but
no, but that's such a big piece of this. And this is what I continue to wrestle with and will continue to. But no, I appreciate getting your insight here. So, all right, let's do a quick cast breakdown here. So we've talked about John Rockwell, very limited experience heading into this. This is one of only 14 credits, according to IMDb. We talked about the Hugh Hefner piece. The last thing about Rockwell, he was 23 at the time of the filming of this pilot, which is very close to Tom Welling, right? During the first season of Smallville, right? He was 24.
Tom was 24. Yeah.
And I
Superboy, huh?
But like it works, especially here's the thing. Here's why I think this is fine. Because George was in his late 30s when Adventures of Superman started. If George had been like 25, 26 in the first season of Adventures of Superman, you'd look at this and you'd be like, what the hell?
Yeah.
But that's not the case. So I think it works because you had kind of an older Superman in Adventures of Superman. And now in Superboy, you have a 20-something playing teen. I think it works.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree, especially in that era. Like everybody's seen Grease. This is what teenagers looked like back then, and even in 2001, as we know. So
yeah, we have Bunny Hennig as Lana Lang. This is one of only 6 credits for Bunny, but we have to now. You and I were messaging about this. We have to add another Lana Lang to the list, and when you talk about kind of the hierarchy of Lana Lang, we've had some great Lana Langs.
Yeah.
I don't know. We only have one episode to base this off of, so there's not much. But I quite liked her in this. Here's the thing. I wanted to say this is important because we talked about in our Golden Age discussion with Tyler from Krypton Report. We talked about Lana's first appearance in the Golden Age, and a lot of the stories in that age and to follow pre-crisis with Lana. She's often presented as kind of annoying, essentially, quote unquote, in Superboy's hair, trying to figure out his secret identity. Hell, even when we get into the post-crisis era, she's kind of this, jilted almost girlfriend from Smallville who's harboring these feelings and settles for Pete Ross. It's like, Lana hasn't always had the best treatment. And one of my takeaways watching this pilot and Lana in particular is that I liked the vibe. I liked her vibe. I liked the dynamic between her and Superboy, or between her and Clark specifically. That, I don't know. She didn't come across as that annoying kind of nagging in his hair character that was presented in the comics at the time. So I don't know. We had so little to watch here, but I liked her in this. What about you?
I did not dislike her. I had no you know what? This is why I didn't like this Lana, right? I just was like, this is fine. Nothing really stuck out. Of like, oh yeah, this is a great take of this character. Had there been 13 episodes, I'm sure her dad would have been, which is a huge thing in the comics, everybody. Lana is not an orphan whose parents died in a meteor shower. Her dad's a professor. He's got this crazy stuff going on, and it's zany. She's always involved in these like archaeological digs and all kinds of stuff, right? And they mentioned that her dad's a college professor. Your dad's just a college professor, and you just runs a store, right? Let's get into that, but no, I didn't dislike her, but she's at the bottom of the list with the other blonde Lana Lang from Lois and Clark, who is by far the worst because she is the worst character because she went out of her way to keep Clark from being Superman. If anybody's seen that one episode of Lois and Clark that talks about Lana Lang, no, it's not the one where he goes home in the first season and encounters Kryptonite for the first time. Everyone in your mind, you think, oh yeah, that sheriff, that was Lana Lang. No, that was a random made up character. They do see Lana Lang, and she's this alternate universe, and she is the worst. And he keeps trying to do super things, and she keeps chewing him out for it. And that's why she's at the bottom. And she's blonde. Okay, I'd be like, redheads? Hello, justice for redheads? Can we get some redhead Lana Langs up in here? My favorite is Annette O'Toole. Sacrilege, maybe, as a Smallville fan, but maybe not because Annette O'Toole is on Smallville. She's my favorite Lana Lang. And there you go. Those are some scattershot thoughts. I didn't dislike this Lana Lang. She just didn't really do anything to separate herself from the pack. so to speak.
Yes, I agree. To be honest, I think the reason why I just have this positive feeling is having read some of these comics with Lana of the era, this felt refreshingly different from that. I mean, not vastly different, but the fact that she wasn't this kind of like annoying girl in his hair, I was pleasantly surprised.
That's true. Yes.
I know this is a tangent, but so Ned O'Toole is your number one. Kristen Kruk number two, or Emmanuel Shrieky? Because this is man, I wrestle with this. Where are you?
Oh, I mean, Superman and Lois would be number two for me.
Because it's a combination, right? We're not just talking about the performance, but it's the material. And,
absolutely.
Right. And Superman and Lois gives us this like fully realized, mature Lana who has a genuine friendship with Clark. And it's the kind of dynamic that I've always longed for as a fan. So it's amazing to see. But it's just, we'll talk about this more when we get to our Smallville episodes, but it's just crazy to me because given my deep affection for Kristen Kruk's Lana Lang, if you had told me that anyone would usurp that position of number one, I would be like, no. And then they cast Sloane from Entourage and give us this like amazing take on Lana. And I'm like, oh, okay.
I was also like, why is everyone on Superman and Lois have black hair? I think, hey, she's great as Lana. I'm just saying every character other than Jonathan, who was blonde, and then they got recast and they made him have dark hair too. I can't tell anyone apart.
I know. No, that's a fair point.
I'm not asking her to dye her hair red. I'm just saying. Anyway, very complicated thoughts on Lana Lang. As you know, I was always a Chloe Sullivan guy myself. So
it's a tough spot to be in 2024.
Yep, indeed.
I think we all watching the show at the time, I think we all had affinity to some degree or another for Chloe. Now you're like, I don't know. But as Ma Kent, we have Monty Margits. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I don't really have any specific notes about her. The main thing here is that she's the only parent we see. And again, the book talks about how they chose this script because it didn't feature Jonathan. And in I don't know, most if not all of the other scripts that are discussed in the book, Jonathan is there. So this was kind of a rarity that only Ma is there. This is something that our mutual friend Tyler brought up in our Golden Age discussion. He put a bug in my ear, and now every time I come across this, I'm like, what the hell? Here, just as in the comics of the era, the Kents are referred to as Clark's foster parents.
Yes. I thought about that when I read that.
What the hell is this? All of these stories clearly establish they adopt him, and there is a very clear distinction in terms of rights and responsibilities and the nature of the relationship when we're talking adoptive parents versus foster parents. And in all of these stories of this era, they continually refer to them as his foster parents. So shout out to Tyler for really kind of honing in on this. But now I've been looking for it, and this is present here as well.
Yeah, I heard you guys' conversation, and then when I read the comic, I saw Clark Kent delivering groceries to his foster father, or whatever the line is. I was like, what? Like, I don't know if it's some leftover vestige of like he's from the orphanage. I mean, maybe it's some leftover, and then the terminology of the time and that sort of thing. But no, he's an adoptive son. He's not in the foster system, right? So that is very odd terminology. I agree.
Not to nitpick, Smallville is this tiny town. How many orphan kids are in this town that they have their own orphanage? It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, and you think if one had superpowers, they'd remember that too.
You would think. We have Ross Elliott as Mr. Drake. He also appeared in the Wonder Woman television series starring Linda Carter and the Shazam television series and 61 episodes of the television series The Virginian. I thought he was great as Jimmy's dad in this. I thought he brought a lot of integrity and warmth to the role.
I'm serious. He's probably my favorite character in this pilot. I think he was like, son, I like my job. And I'm like, you know what? This is good. Like, I like how he's like, I live this life. I'm doing my best and I enjoy what I do. And I'm like, and I'm doing this. I don't know. He left a good impression on me.
Yeah. He's like, I guess there isn't a lot to say about being a doorman, but you know what? At the same time, I make no apologies for it. I do this. We all end up in our lot in life for various circumstances. And if you end up going to the college of your choice and entering the profession of your choice, I'll consider myself a success. And I'm like, right on. It was great.
Yeah.
In that scene, I know I'm jumping ahead, but in that scene with young Jimmy there, he asks his son, do you understand? And Jimmy says, yeah, I understand, Pop. And Mr. Drake says, nah, you don't, but you will. I got to say, as I know I talk about this all the time, but like as a dad, I was like, yep, that's the thing. Like I think about that a lot. It's not so much something that I say to my son. He's so young at this point, but that kind of idea of like, yeah, you might kind of have a sense. You won't really know until the time comes, but that's all right. But he was great in this. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page.
Hey everyone, I'm Marshall and she's
Courtney, and we're your hosts of Blurred Watchers podcast here on the Pop Break.
Come hang out with us as we discuss, cross-examine, theorize, summarize, and review our favorite offerings.
And tangents, there will be tangents, whether it be live, streaming, or anything in between. If we watch it and think it's cool, we invite you to come hang with us as we all talk about it.
Our episodes post every third Monday on the Pop Break podcast feed.
See you there. Bye.
I'm a proud backer of the Paragons of Earth comic book project, now available to support on Kickstarter. The creative team of Percival Constantine, Thomas DJ, and Eric Johns have plucked forgotten Golden Age superheroes from the public domain, reinvented them as their own sort of Justice League, and put them up against a Lovecraftian apocalypse. Back this project and learn more by going to percivalconstantine.com/paragons. Also, Perry, a multiple-time guest on Digging for Kryptonite, hosts the Superhero Cinephiles podcast about comic book-inspired films. Be sure to listen wherever you get podcasts. Now, we talked about the fact that in the comic, this young classmate is named Tommy. Here, he's named Jimmy. He mentioned that maybe it's because of Jimmy Olsen from the comics. I think it's because the actor was Jimmy Bates. I think that's all it really comes down to here. Who was on 22 episodes of Father Knows Best. But okay. I kind of feel like that's it. But it's like, you know, Jimmy Olsen is such an iconic member of the Superman supporting cast. So naming one of these young characters Jimmy, it's like, why? You have so many other names to choose from.
I mean, Pete Ross. Hello.
Yeah, Pete. I know exactly.
But his dad runs a cream corn factory, as we know, Anthony, and they're not going to change that. I'd be really mad if they changed that.
We have our criminal trio here: Charles Maxwell as Gunner, Richard Reeves as Shifty. No relation to George Reeves. He's come up recently on our George Reeves Adventures of Superman rewatch podcast. He was in a bunch of episodes, a handful of Adventures of Superman. No relation to George. Stacey Harris as Jake. He was in 23 episodes of The Life and Legend of Wyatt Earp. So there you go. And
I missed it in the show that they weren't the ABC gang like they were in the comics. They were like, it was like an A name, a B name, and a C name. Like, oh, that's pretty. It's a nice shtick if you're going to be criminals, and they just dropped that for the show. So
yeah, no, right on. And then we have, this is a minor role, but Trudy Ellison played Donna. She's the first member of the class who's giving her oral report on her father's occupation, and she was up for the role of Lana. So she didn't get the role of Lana, but or Lana, as is said in this. Oh God, that drove me nuts.
That's not the only time too. It's I believe in Lois and Clark and Superman the Animated Series they call her Lana. And but Superman 3 was Lana. So like there was a precedent in live action or animation to pronounce it Lana. So we got a Ra's al Ghul situation on our hands here.
I know. Yes. And this was one of only 10 credits for her. And then Robert B. Williams as Chief Parker. But that's our cast.
Chief Parker calling Superboy. Is he a comic book guy, right?
Yes. You know, it's funny though, because we just did our Silver Age episode. I don't know that he really popped up in, I don't know if any of the ones that we talked about specifically, but yes, I mean, he was a fixture of the comics as well. So that's the thing. I think a very faithful take on the Superboy comics. No, you don't
way
have...
more faithful than Smallville was, Anthony. I mean, let's be real. This is way more faithful to the comic books people are reading in 1961 than the Smallville was to the comic books people are reading in 2001.
This has flights. It has tights. It has glasses. If you ever showed Tom Welling this pilot, he'd be like, oh,
what a loser.
What a loser wearing those glasses.
30 seconds a season I'll give you, but that's it.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, no. So it was definitely very faithful. So, any other big picture thoughts before we segue into our scene by scene discussion here?
You know, it did feel a little Batman to me because he goes and I had to laugh when he goes through his book. He gets the light and he goes to the bookcase and he goes talk to the police chief and the thing. And then, you know, looking up in the book here, they filmed in Griffith Park near Bronson Canyon where they shot the Batcave and stuff. And I know everything's in California, but it just kind of made me thinking like just in Batman, even before the Batman 66 show, that whole like, you know, just because in the Batman 66 show, they go through the library secret door and they go talk to the police and all that. And he's on that literally talking to a police officer on a walkie-talkie or a radio or a phone. That was like, oh, that's very Batman, right? But I guess if that's what he was doing in the comics, then I guess there's only so many ways you can communicate with law enforcement, and there you go. So I don't think anybody's like copying each other there, but that was just something that stuck out to me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, let's go through our scene by scene breakdown, or to put another spin on it. Welcome to the one and only exciting episode in the Adventures of Superboy. Here we go. Now, the book that we've been referencing here, they actually have screenshots and a text summary of that opening sequence here. So I'll read it briefly. I feel like you on your podcast, because again, you always have your book or your magazine that you're referencing. So I'll take a page from your book and we'll do that. So Superboy. I like that whispering at the Superboy. It's the adventures of Superboy, incredible boy of steel, powerful, fearless, invulnerable, only survivor of the doomed planet Krypton, home of a race of fine and noble humans far advanced over those of our own world. Superboy, whose scientist father sent him hurtling into the far reaches of interstellar space in a tiny craft moments before the great Krypton exploded into a billion fragments. Speeding the spaceship unerringly in its course for planet Earth, where, landing safely, the infant Superboy was found and adopted by a small-town couple, Jonathan and Martha Kent. And now, some years later, the child is young Clark Kent, a student at Smallville High School, where his meek, retiring manner hides an exciting secret known only to himself and his foster parents, the secret that Clark Kent is, in reality, Superboy, champion of the oppressed, enemy of evildoers, dedicated to the cause of truth and justice. But not the American way.
That was interesting, wasn't it?
Yep.
He's standing in space, but not in front of that American flag this time. So, because in the Fleischer cartoons, also truth and justice, not the American way. So not as integral to the Superman intros as pop culture might lead you to believe.
This is a very good point. This comes up now in a number of instances, like you've said. Yeah. That stood out to me. The fact that, American way is not used, but they use champion of the oppressed. I mean, that's harkening back to the golden age, his
love
roots.
I love that.
I like that a lot.
Also some stock footage from, I believe, Superman on Earth, the George Reeves show.
I believe so as well. I couldn't confirm that, but it looks like it's right out of the George Reeves series.
The Krypton stuff. And then when the ship lands, though, that looked new to me. I didn't identify that. I know in the Kirk Allen serials, it was a cartoon ship. So I know it wasn't from that.
Yeah. And here they're Jonathan and Martha, consistent with the comics of the time. Of course, in the George Reeves series, we're into the... now I have to double check my own trivia here. I don't know if we're there. It's Eben
and Sarah, I think.
Eben and Sarah. Yeah, I think that's what the Reeves show followed. Definitely Eben, but in any event, there's that.
So it can't be a prequel to George Reeves.
That's true. Another inconsistency. The other thing that stood out to me was, and not to nitpick on the performance, but they reference Clark's meek, retiring manner. I guess we don't see quite enough of him in the Clark Kent guys to really get a firm handle on this, but I don't know. Do you think that Rockwell's performance as Clark kind of lives up to the meek retiring model described?
No, I would hope that as over the course of other episodes, we'd see more like Clark Kent isms right? Because you gotta sell somebody on, like, it's part of the charm of the character, right? That dual identity is part of the charm of the character, and you want to see that. Oh, sorry, blah, blah. Not maybe not like that, not to the extreme of Christopher Reeve every time, right? But something. Even George Reeves would give you that, as people would say, there's no difference. The more I watch of Adventures of Superman, sure, his voice is exactly the same, but sometimes he acts a little different, and I enjoy it, and it's part of the charm of George Reeves. And I was not sold on the mild mannered retiring attitude of John Rockwell's Clark Kent on this.
Yeah, I feel like that's an instance where maybe they're telling us more than they're showing us. But in any event, we'll go scene by scene. We've hit on a lot already, so we don't have to dwell on things we've already discussed. But we'll go scene by scene through this pilot here, just like you and I do on each of our rewatch podcasts. And you will lay it out for folks who have never seen this and might never see this. After that opening sequence, we open on the Smallville classroom here, and students are giving oral essays on, quote unquote, my father's occupation. So very much a product of its time.
Yeah.
Only your dad's occupation. That's all that would be, fodder for discussion. And we start with Donna, who we've referenced earlier, talking about her father implementing these water filtration systems around the world and in Smallville. And she's very proud, and it's quite the to-do, and the whole class applauds. And then next up is young Jimmy Drake here, who you could tell has got a bit of a sourpuss even before he goes up there. And all he can muster is, my father is a doorman at the Aero Theater, period. And everybody laughs. Now, why do you think the classmates were laughing?
Maybe I thought they were just laughing at just his general demeanor more than anything. I don't think they the thing was, they never had, like, if you really wanted to do this, right? You have a scene where the doormat, he's like, opening the door for people, and then some jerk teenagers in a convertible come by and like throw a tomato at him or something, right? He's looked at as a lower member of the community. And there's an avenue for that kind of storytelling, but like at no point do they do any of that. So it doesn't seem like, other than like, oh, I guess that's supposed to be a profession we look down on. That's the only vibe that I got, like that, why he would be not proud of his dad and why kids would laugh, right?
That's the thing. Again, I know maybe we're taking too critical an eye towards this, but I think it's fair game, because I agree. I had the same read. I think people laugh because he's a doorman, period. When they're meant to be up there delivering this oral essay. I mean, presumably there's a time limit or a word limit they're supposed to reach here. And I think the fact that he's short-circuiting the process like that, and he's being so curt and so flip about it, I think that's why they're laughing. I think for this to land more, yeah, if he had said, my father's a doorman, and everyone started laughing, it's like, oh, okay. Like, this feeds into why he kind of looks down on his dad and he's ashamed. But we're not given that. But
if they had cut him off and kids were throwing like paper at him, and that's spitball in him, like that's what you need. Like, I want to rewrite this episode now. I'm getting all into it now. But and then Clark has to be the one that's standing. No, listen, that we all have. George Reeves would have stood up and looked at the camera and said, "We all have professions, everybody." And that's what I'm looking for from these shows. I
mean, George Reeves season 2 forward would have stood up and said that. Season 1 would have just like punched anyone who was laughing. And we would have loved it. But Clark and Lana, clock the distress that their classmate is feeling. And Lana says, hey, let's walk home with him. And so then we're outside on the sidewalk here, and they catch up with Jimmy. And Jimmy explains he listened to the rest of the class talking about their father's jobs, about Clark's dad at the grocery store, and then Lana's father, the teacher here. And you get this exchange where both Clark and Lana try to make him feel better, almost by putting down their own fathers.
My dad's just a teacher.
My dad, I love where Lana's like, my dad's just a teacher. Your dad probably makes more than him in a year. It's like, okay. But Jimmy's quick to push back, and he's like, look, Clark, your dad owns the grocery store, and Lana, your dad's a professor. They have standing in the community. Right? Like, my dad's just a doorman here. And we cut across the street, and we see his father standing outside in his new uniform. And though not firmly established in this scene, but we'll see later, they live in the apartment above the theater. So Jimmy heads off in that direction. And then you get more conversation between Clark and Lana, where she's like, hey, essentially like, why is he looking down on his father? It doesn't matter what job he has. And he had to raise Jimmy alone. Right. So there's that whole single father dynamic as well that she's quick to point out here. And then as Clark and Lana walk away, they pass by our criminal trio here. So we'll learn their names and more of the dynamic as we go along here. But essentially we have this trio of Shifty and then the brothers, Jake and Gunner. And they're casing out the theater because they're going to try to, and they will, knock off this this diamond heist here. They're going to steal the diamonds that are going to be on display as part of this movie promotion here. But Shifty's in the backseat. Yeah.
With names like Shifty and Gunner, I mean, they really didn't have a shot, right?
I feel like the deck was really stacked against them here. They only really had one road to go down, but yeah, Shifty's in the back. He wants to get going. He's like, hey, it's not like we're knocking over Fort Knox here. And they're like, well, when you see this score, it's going to feel like Fort Knox. So we get a little bit of an insight into that dynamic. And then we have a lovely, I think, great, beautiful scene between Jimmy and his father that really goes on far too long for a Superboy pilot, right? Like, again, I think had this been episode 3 or 4 and we're getting more into the classmates and the people in Smallville, great. I would have no problem with it. But as a pilot, it's an awfully long time to spend with Jimmy and his father. What did you think?
Yeah, this is a conversation. I want this sort of scene between Jonathan and Clark, right?
Yes.
Because I'm sold on this guy and his son. But I'd rather be sold on Jonathan and Clark in my Superboy pilot, right? But I think the dude has some good, like we said, he has some salt of the earth wisdom. He's like, we can't all be airplane pilots or great surgeons, and some of us have ordinary jobs. And, I mean, like, this is a good message, right? Because like these things are parables for presumably kids or the audience for this. And you want to know, like, yeah, you respect the garbage person, right? You respect these people and what they're just, you don't laugh at them because they don't have they're not like on top of the world in their job, right? So I think that's the missing moral message in here, right? I wanted to see some bullies throw stuff at this guy and Clark stands up to him or Superboy or whatever, right? Now he gains respect for over the course of the episode, but like I really could have really honed in on what the message they were saying here. So it did go on too long, though. I totally agree.
Yeah, again, for our first introduction to these characters. But yes, the points raised are valuable ones. And I agree with you. Like the overall message of this, it's like, hey, it doesn't matter what job you have, as long as you do it well and with pride and to provide for yourself and your loved ones. There's no shame in that, as long as it's a positive thing or not hurting anybody. So like I think that is a valuable message. I think that, and we talked about a lot of the specifics in this conversation already earlier in this episode here. One new bit of information, we find out that the father here is taking correspondence classes. He's a budding artist, which of course will factor in later in the episode. The only the other problem that I think I had with this scene is that even though Mr. Drake says, you don't fully understand now, but you will later. But I think Jimmy, actually does understand a good bit at this point, and I think it's too early in the episode. I feel like this was too soon for him to. I feel like he largely learns the major point here. I don't know that he has that much further to go. Because skipping ahead a bit, when we get to later in the episode, and Mr. Drake is looking at mugshots to try to find the crooks who stole the diamonds, it's his son who's like, "Hey, you should draw them. You're a great artist. You can do this." So already by that point, he's gotten this faith in his father. I feel like it's too much and too early in the episode.
That's a great point. That's man. Wait, are we bringing too many modern sensibilities to storytelling? I don't think so, because you have an arc to any story, right? So if the guy is down on his dad's he's clearly embarrassed about it. The next scene, he's totally like, "Oh yeah, I get it," and I guess he does get it.
like that, and so that's why I don't feel like we're being too hard, because I feel like these are some very fundamental aspects of storytelling. Whose arc is it? And here they give it to Jimmy, even though it really should be Clark's, right, for our pilot here. And then on top of it, he has, I think, a pretty major moment of understanding very early. Now, going back to the comic book, Superboy number 88, interestingly there, I think that actually does a better job, because you don't have this involved scene between the two of them. It's like a panel where he's at home and the father's like, "What's wrong?" And he's like, "Why are you just a doorman?" Like, that's it. And then even to your point, when Superboy, like And that too makes Superboy more of an active participant in this, where Superboy's like, hey, I got to try to help this guy. I'm going to go back in time. I read that he was this war hero in the Smallville historical records. I'm going to go back in time. I'm going to film him in his
as you do
wartime exploits. I'm going to show this to, and even that's the thing in the comic, when Superboy shows Jimmy these home movies that Superboy has made of his father in the war, even that doesn't sway Tommy in the comic, where he's like, well, the only uniform he wears now is his doorman uniform.
That's right. The only uniform he wears now. Oh my goodness.
Which is kind of over the top, but it's like that actually does a better job of carrying this thread through.
That's like, I really can't, like, just from a purely story perspective, I can't say which one was maybe better. I think that there are pros and cons to each one. The time travel is just ridiculous and I can't get over it. But the fact that he still like doesn't accept, things as they are with his dad until the end, that's what you call an arc, my friend.
That's an arc.
A character arc.
Also, skipping ahead to the end of the comic, there's such a clever bit that they do in the comic where when the father is taken by the bad guys, he drops the buttons from his uniform and leaves them as a trail for Superboy. So it's like it pays off all this business about his doorman uniform. He's only a doorman, but it's like that doorman uniform ends up being the key to this.
Yeah.
I don't know. Audience, if you can't watch the show, just read Superboy number 80. Of course, that's not available anywhere. You'll have to resort to the means that we often have to resort to.
The saddest boy in Smallville is the sub story, because I think that issue has like 4 stories in it, right? No,
yes,
something like that.
Then we're in the hotel with our trio here. With
could I interject about the hotel?
Course.
Reading along in the Superboy and Super Pup the Lost Videos book as you are. I love how it describes where the bad guys are. In a cheap hotel on the bad side of Smallville. The bad side of Smallville?
I think that's whether it's a Smallville TV show or these comics or this show, it does sort of upend this whole idea of this quaint small town. Like when you're telling stories there, you need to have these avenues. Like I get it, but then it's like, how big is this town? There's a bad side. There's an orphanage, going back to the comics, there's a museum, like there's all this stuff. It's like more of a mini metropolis, really.
Yeah.
But in any event, the three of them, they're talking about their plan here. Shifty is a little agitated here. He's complaining about the fact that he's the one who has to keep Superboy busy and get pinched, right? So now we're getting some insight into the plan. The other two are going to knock off the theater here with a diamond display while Shifty keeps Superboy busy. And the brothers reassure him he'll only be away for a few months. That was another thing in this episode here, because this comes up later where Chief Parker, after Shifty's been apprehended, he's like, well, we can only charge him with malicious mischief. He'll be out in a few months. It's like, we'll get to this, but it's like, you're shooting at the chief of police. Is there not a greater charge that we can levy against him?
I mean, the 60s was a different time, I guess.
But it feels like more than a fair trade-off. It's like he goes away for a few months. He comes out, he splits the loot with them. But I don't know. Yes, it just feels like there would have been a greater penalty for what he ends up doing.
Attempted murder of a police officer, I think, is the phrase you're looking for. So,
yeah, right.
Hefty sentence, more than a few months.
One would think, but apparently not. And Shifty here also makes reference to the brothers having had plastic surgery. They look like movie stars now. So this will play in later where Mr. Drake is unable to identify them in the mug book. But Jake heads off, and this takes us to the theater where we see him casing out the place once again. There's a sign advertising this display, this movie promotion. They're going to be displaying $200,000 worth of these rare diamonds to tie into this movie, Raja's Ransom, which stars an actor from Smallville. And this hometown star and the producer of the movie are going to come to the premiere. They're going to have this diamond display. It's a whole to-do. We have the manager of the theater and Mr. Drake standing over the diamonds, talking about it. It's a whole thing. Very exciting for the small town.
I got to say, I was disappointed that the theater was not called the Talon.
Right?
Anthony, I don't know about you, but...
I know, man. I was waiting for that.
I understand the whole plot is revolved, or the linchpin of this plot is these diamonds. But I hate to break it to all y'all, but when they film diamonds in movies, those are also fake. Like, They don't go get real diamonds. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Maybe they did it differently in the 50s and 60s. I don't know. But there's like, to say like these are the actual diamonds, which are real diamonds we used making this movie. I mean, you're just putting a target on yourself at that point. So
this is true. And then they have to hire police officers / security guards to stand watch over it. It just seems like a whole thing. I know if
it's out on the street. It's not even in the lobby.
I know if they had said these are the real diamonds that the movie was based on or something like that. But you're right? Like you're not using real diamonds in the actual movie. So to say these are the diamonds from the movie, I know we have to go along with it. But also $200,000 in 1961 dollars or 2024 dollars, a lot of money here. So you can understand why
I'll take 200,000. Yeah,
why this would be a target. So next we're at the canyon here. The brothers drop off Shifty, and he holes up in this shack to wait for Chief Parker, because this apparently is Parker's regular route. So they know he's going to be coming this way. They tell Shifty, make sure you blow out the tire here. So he holes up in this shack, and when Parker shows up, he opens fire here. Now we're at the Kent house. For anyone listening to this, if you're really keeping track of how much Clark or Superboy is in this, we're like pretty deep into the episode at this point. But he and Lana are doing their math homework in the Kent living room, and all of a sudden the lamp starts flickering, right? And of course, that's the signal. When Parker needs to radio to Superboy, they've got this whole setup that's rigged here, and the lamp flickers to signal Clark. And he makes this excuse about not feeling like doing any more math problems. I loved Ma in this scene where she's like a great wingman. What was your reaction to her?
Well, she like kind of gives him the nod, and I'm like, okay, there's a quiet understanding. She's like, oh, never mind that, Lana. Let's go make some cookies for the church social. And she's like, okay. I don't know. You need that, right? It's fun.
Yeah, it's I have to think about this more, but there's something that's I'm very almost surprised by when we look at these pre-crisis comics and now this adaptation here. It would be very if it had been the case that Clark kept his Superboy identity secret from the Kents. I mean, I guess it would have been a stretch because they found him in a rocket ship, but at the same time, right. Given the sensibilities of the day and whatnot, I don't know. I wouldn't have been gobsmacked if that had been the case. So I'm happy that's not the case, because it puts such a distinct spin on this.
Maybe you never thought this way about Smallville, but the first episode of Smallville I watched was Metamorphosis, right? I was one behind and I got caught up and over time. And the way that episode is presented, right? I was like, does Martha not know that he has like powers and stuff? Because like there's that big truck accident and Clark saves Whitney and then Jonathan and Clark are off talking on the porch after that. He's like, oh, I really freaked out your mother today. What did? And I'm like, what? Not obviously she knows he came in a ship or something, but like that he has all these powers. I don't know. But then you get into Spider-Man territory with Aunt May, and that's that character's bag, not Superman's bag. And obviously in this stage of his life, the only people he has to talk to about this are his parents. So they definitely should be in on the secret.
Yes, 1,000%. So Ma diverts Lana, and then we get Clark opening up or pushing the bookcase there, which turns, and he enters his little hideout. Yeah. And then he's on the radio talking to Chief Parker. He changes into a Superboy costume. He drops through this trap door. He goes through the tunnel. He pushes this boulder. Again, straight out of the comics. This idea that there are these tunnels under the Kent General Store, under the house, and that's how he's using to get to and fro. And
that's really smart, though.
Yes,
right, because like if he's in a suburb, like hey, Superboy's taking off in the backyard of this house all the time. He can't be having that. So it actually makes a lot of sense. And I remember seeing those exact. It just struck me like when I was there, I'm like, what, they have like a basement going? It really is the Batcave. He goes under, going underground or whatever, like the tunnel out. I assume Superboy dug these tunnels himself, right? Like it's at super speed and presumably. But it's a cool, different status quo than Superman, right? It's a little different, and that's fun.
Yeah, more and more where I think I'm landing on the Superboy of this is that I think the stories in a vacuum in this setting are kind of interesting and endearing, and there's an appeal to them. It's when we try to then fit them into the larger Superman narrative that it's like, this, I don't know how well this works, but that's not to say you can't tell these kinds of stories in their own little pocket. So there's something to be said. I got to say, so my son who's almost 5, he loves Spidey and His Amazing Friends on Disney Plus, and I got to say it's a great show and it's perfect for his age group, and we watch it together. But there, every now and then, when the team needs to summon the web quarters or the spider crawler, it's like it emerges from this underground bunker beneath the Parker house, and I always ask my son, I'm like, do you think the neighbors know he's Spider-Man? It's like it's kind of crazy. Yet somehow their secret identity is preserved. I can't make sense of that. But here, like to your point, the tunnels make all the sense in the world. It's this
thought it through.
It's this great setup here. So Superboy shows up to the canyon here, and he shouts at Shifty. So he's on the scene there. We cut back to the theater. The brothers make their move. They toss this bomb that contains sleeping gas, and it knocks out the guards. And then Mr. Drake comes out, and he gets knocked out as well. And the guys take the diamonds, and they make off with them. And then back at the canyon, Superboy enters the shack, and he just lets Shifty use up all of his rounds on him. Of course, they have no effect. And then he takes the gun and he bends it. I mean, it's it's minimal, but it's classic. You get the bending of the gun.
Oh, when did Superman get like super speed? Because when we see Superman running, when I see someone in a Superman costume just running at normal speed, it's like, huh. You know what I mean?
So that's actually
because he runs this giant expanse of this canyon. He runs from a police car like 1,000 feet up to this shack, and that's what this came to mind for me.
So I hate to do this, but in yet another failing of this pilot, they didn't use super speed because according to the book, that would have been part of the power set in the series, and there was this new animated streak of smoke effect that would have visualized the super speed. That would have been great here. No, I think about that all the time, especially watching all these George Reeves episodes. It's like, it is, and it's funny too. I guess you fall into a groove and you stop thinking about it all the time. But when you take a second, it's like, yeah, this is not the way you're used to Superman moving, right? In this pilot, in the George Reeves show, in the Kirk Allen thing, like he's just running. Like it's not the same.
Well, and then also, hey, this is our first look at Superboy, right? This little sequence here.
Yes.
What did you think of the costume?
It was solid. I don't know that I have much of a take on it. I mean, it definitely felt in keeping with what we were seeing or we had seen in the George Reeves series. I don't know. What was your reaction to it?
Yeah, I don't really have any notes. And again, using the kind of same connection I was talking about earlier with the Christopher Reeve movies and the Superboy TV show, made by the same people. Like, this is basically the George Reeves suit, much in the way that the Superboys on that show basically wear the Christopher Reeve costume. Even the S on the back is the, two-tone S, presumably red and yellow if this was in color. Then, to my knowledge, George Reeves, and now this, is the only version of the costume that has that, like, S on the front, S on the back. It's the same, right? So, yeah, I mean, I know no complaints, no notes. This is straight out of the comic books. It looks exactly like Superboy does, and it looks exactly like George Reeves did.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It definitely feels in keeping with that. And they talk in the book, I guess Rockwell himself in an interview talks about how, because they shot this pilot in black and white, I mean, presumably the series, had it gone to series, would have been shot in color the same way the latter seasons of the George show were. But
yeah, you would think.
They shot this in black and white, and Rockwell talks about being surprised when he saw the brown and gray costume, and it was explained this is how we need to photograph it for black and white. But
they're saving money, so they did black and white. But think about this: this is an episode, so they're just gonna have one random episode be black and white, and the rest are in color, or would they just made a whole show in color? I mean, made a whole show in black and white.
I don't know. We'll never know. I don't know.
We'll never know.
We'll never know. We'll never know. But that is a good question here. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. Acme Comics is a locally owned and operated comic book store in Greensboro, North Carolina for people of all ages and walks of life. With more than 40 years and a new second location to its name, Acme is a multiple-time Eisner Award nominee. The shop features a significant contemporary and vintage selection, as the Acme team uses their collective knowledge and resources to connect you with the best material. Mail order subscriptions to new releases are available, and all offerings are available anywhere via mail order. Follow Acme on social media and eBay, listen to the Acme Cast on all podcast services, and visit acmecomics.com for much more. We are an affiliate of BCW Supplies, so the next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you. So Superboy disarms Shifty here. He's apprehended. Chief Parker gets a call on the radio about this heist at the movie theater, and Superboy takes off. In the meantime, the crooks have switched cars. That'll come into play a little bit later. But Superboy shows up at the theater here. This is probably one of my favorite parts of this pilot here, where the manager, he's so upset. He's like, no one saw anything, Superboy. No one saw anything. Jimmy's dad shows up and he's like, he gives a description of the guys and more specifically, the license plate number. It's
Yep.
very specific.
Yeah, I mean, I would not classify that as no one saw anything. So, but hey, he just lost $200,000. I get the hysteria. I would feel the same way.
Yeah,
It's game over, man.
He's
Game
a little
over.
he's a little out of sorts here.
Oh, you know what? Talking about Superboy flying back and forth, using the same flying sound effects from Adventures of Superman, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the more I learn about the Jordan show, the more I realize they just took a lot of stock stuff. Even the theme is stock music, right? I'm like, oh, I thought that was your thing. So who knows where in the archives they found that, but they're using it, and that just a little bit of through line continuity. Not even saying like it's the same universe and it's a prequel. Just saying like, hey, that's how Superman flies, and that's how we hear him fly. I did. That made me feel good to hear that sound effect again.
I agree. The other thing about whether this would or could have been a prequel, continuity specifics aside, I don't know. I mean, it's hard because the George Reeves show, it's not like that was a slave to continuity or it had these serialized stories. I mean, again, Pepperwinkle, I think, is a good example of a potential crossover character, and they would have attempted that here from what we saw from those unfilmed scripts. So I think there are a couple of places where you could have seen it, but otherwise, I don't know. I guess, what am I trying to say? I don't know how often this would have even presented itself as an opportunity, where I think as kids watching it at the time, had this gone to series, you could have looked at it in that way or not. And I think either way probably would have been all right.
I enjoy the vagueness. That's fun. So.
We can live in that gray area. But Superboy takes off to try to find the car. That's a dead end because he finds the abandoned car. Like we said, they had already switched them. This is not to nitpick, but he goes back to the theater. And so Jimmy's dad is talking about how essentially like no harm, no foul, like no one was hurt and the diamonds are insured.
They're insured.
Which is just, it sort of feels like, why lessen the stakes of this episode? Because we've already dealt with most of the emotional business with Jimmy here. And now we're saying like, all right, these guys made off. We have to catch them, but it's not really that like that pressing. I feel like
there's no emotional stakes. There's no longer any financial stakes.
The only real stakes,
it's an embarrassment, I guess, to them.
That's the thing. The manager, he's the one who now we're called upon to invest in, because it's like his movie premiere is in shambles because of this. But Superboy's got him covered there because he asks the police officer, how the police station is heated. And when he says coal, he says to the manager, all right, I'm going to give you an approximation of what you lost. And, we, as comics fans, we can surmise where this is going.
We know where this is going.
We'll see that in a minute here. But Superboy, Mr. Drake, and Jimmy, who's now on the scene here, they go off to the police station to look at mugshots. This is so minor, but did it not look like Superboy was getting in the car with them when they were heading off? Was he going to ride in the car with them?
That's funny. Whenever I see Clark on Smallville in a car driving, like, so weird, and it'd be the same thing. A guy, even weirder to see a dude in a Superman costume ride in the car. I think it was like general stage direction. Like, okay, we're all leaving. And as a group, like, you're just kind of, let me get in the car. But yeah, they cut away before we saw him.
Yes,
as a passenger.
So now we get to the police station, and like the longest scene. There's a lot of business here in this scene.
Yeah, they're really counting that budget. Like, okay, how long does this need to be? We can the scene of the 4 people at the table. We can knock out at least 7 minutes of the show there. I guarantee you they're counting some minutes here, huh?
All right, I'll run through this quick, and then what stands out to you, whatever you want to talk about, let me know. So, Mr. Drake, he can't find the robbers in the mug book. Superboy deduces that there must be some connection between the shootout and the robbery, the fact that they were taking place at the same time. Chief Parker is wise enough to look up known accomplices of Shifty and finds these 2 brothers, Jake and Gunner, but Drake doesn't recognize their mugshots in the book. Jimmy now suggests that his dad draws them. So like I said, like already he seems to have come around a good bit towards his father. And then while Drake draws, Superboy has the son fetch the coal and then crushes it into diamonds, like we've seen him do. This was a cool effect, I thought.
It was cool. I mean, it's a really nice practical effect, right? In camera. And had we seen George Reeves do this on his show before?
At least not as far as where I am in my rewatch. Maybe when we get to the color years, I don't know. But actually, they did talk. I think they talked in the book about there was a new effect that they used where there was like a tube in Rockwell's sleeve that emitted the smoke.
The mist. Yeah. They made it look like something. No, this is a go-to. We see it here. We see it in Superman 3 when he makes a ring for Lana. We see it in Smallville when he makes a ring for Lana. Seems to be the go-to move. But yeah, no, that's a cool display of his. That's the kind of stuff you see on shows like this. Like he's gonna crush a rock and it's gonna be a diamond. Like that's great. We can't see him fighting a robot, but we can see him do this.
Yeah, no, that totally works here. And then Superboy has Shifty brought in and gives him a makeshift lie detector test with his super senses, asking him all these questions about whether he was involved with the robbery, whether he knows his brothers. He shows him the sketches that Mr. Drake has drawn. And
see, that's a step too far. The super senses of like, I can listen to your heartbeat. I'm like, I guess that's true, but then like he should always know when people are lying. And when you do that for any character, it kind of lowers a lot of stakes. Like in Adventures of Superman, right? There's an episode where George Reeves like holds a guy's wrist.
Got to hold his wrist. That's what was missing here.
Right. I'm serious. I wanted to see him go hold his hand the whole time because that's a barrier. You just can't, like Clark can't just go stand and hold people's arms the whole time. That guy was in jail, so he was like cool with it, I guess. But
he wanted that $10,000 in that 5 Minutes to Doom episode. He's like, if this guy wants to hold my hand, it's fine. It's $10,000 in the 1950s. That's a lot of money.
Right.
It's a lot of money now.
See what I mean, though, about like when he can't just stand there and be a lie detector. So
yes,
it's a story shortcut that they should have just thought an extra step through. Is my point.
So after Shifty is taken away, so now we have this plan where Mr. Drake has drawn these sketches, but that's not enough.
Really spot on sketches, apparently.
He's a great, those correspondence classes are really paying off.
Like, I don't know if anybody out there watches a lot of, used to in back in the day, watch Unsolved Mysteries, right? They show a lot of mug shots, a lot of police sketches. Those are just completely off what these America's Most Wanted, we've all seen them, right? And then you see like the actual guy. I'm like, that looks nothing like that. I that's an amazing profession, though. The people that can nail that stuff, like just off description, like a lot of respect for that. And this guy, maybe this will open new job opportunities for him more than just a doorman. Because if I was on any law enforcement department, I would hire this guy immediately. Having seen he saw these guys for 5 seconds, he drew them like this, and seeing what they look like, this dude, spot on. Good on you, Mr. Drake.
Zach, I take great umbrage at you saying just a doorman, because clearly the point of this episode.
Well, you know what? I don't know, because let's can explore that, because he has worth now that he can do this. Like, that's what, my dad's not just a doorman, as he says at the end. I'm like, oh, did we just undercut our message show? The comic didn't do that. Maybe the comic is better, Anthony.
I know. So what they hatched this plan here, though, because Parker and Superboy, they recognize that the sketches are not enough, right? They need to lure these criminals out of hiding with this notion that there's an eyewitness who can identify them. And so they are going to publish, and they do publish Mr. Drake's name and address, and they tell him he has to stay in his apartment. Yeah. Why does he have to be inside the apartment? And why do they have to use his actual home?
That's a good point. They should have just picked a random address, and then the guys come to get him and like, oh, the police department is here. You're Superboy, wait here with us at this location. This is the thing, right? Our criticisms, and I know you say this on another exciting episode of the Adventures of Superman a lot. Our criticisms are not like, this was made in the 50s. Look at this fake looking thing. Like, it's like, this is basic story construction we're discussing here.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I that's why I make it on that other show. And I appreciate you bringing that up here, because it's true. Like, I never want it to seem like, oh, I'm harping on, again, the technical limitations of the day. It's like, no, man, I don't expect anything crazy. I don't expect to see him fighting Brainiac. I know that's not the show that we're in, but these are, again, pretty basic. But in any event here. So this now takes us to our climax, where the brothers, they see the paper, they decide they're going to go take care of this guy. Back in the classroom, Clark and Lana are taking a math test, the math test that they were studying for earlier in the episode. And Superboy is using Clark is using his X-ray vision to see what the effects.
That's just the Starverse and stuff. Like,
I know.
So now I'm criticizing. Well, I'm going against what I just said. I'm sorry. But I just think, just do the whole blur thing. Do the whole transparent thing. Fine. I don't need to see beams and stuff. You know what I mean?
I agree.
Like I'm trying to save you money.
Yeah, I know. It's like, you guys, you don't have to, don't go crazy here. But he sees the brothers.
Said, looking at that building all day. He's like, well, looking through it, really. I'm like, very George Reeves, just flat out saying what he's doing, using his powers.
More and more, I love the George Reeves-esque approach of you just lean into it. You don't try to hide it. You just lean into it, and people are like, oh, okay, I guess he's not. But he sees the brother show up with his X-ray vision, and so he hands in his math test early. You know, here's my biggest question from this episode. How did he do on that test? Is this the case of the super intelligence, and he already clearly had all the right answers, or
was he just like, well, I gotta fill out these numbers and turn it? You know, in college when like somebody turns a test in first, like really fast, you're like, either that person is a genius or they just failed this course.
One of the most indelible memories I have from law school is during our exams at the end of our first year. And I remember there was one student who was usually the first or one of the first to finish. I learned like much later, he was not a particularly strong student, but at the time it's that question. You don't know. And I remember I think it was our property exam, like he was done so early. And I remember one of my classmates, one of my buddies at the time, turned to me and we just had this look. We just exchanged this look and shook our heads of like, what is this? Because it was shockingly early. Like it was unbelievably early. But that's what Clark pulls in this.
Well, the reason I say college and not high school, even though they're in high school, is Clark gets to leave after turning in his test, like college. May I be excused? Well, if you're done with your test, go ahead, Clark.
I know. What the hell kind of high school is this? You know, I went to an all boys Catholic high school, very strict. I mean, we weren't even allowed to leave campus during a free period until senior year. That was a senior privilege. When you're senior year, then if you have a free period, you can go. But before that, you're not going anywhere. So. You
know, you probably weren't allowed to talk to your friend at the desk next to you as you were taking the test, right? As Clark and Lana were.
I know. I love how Lana's like, well, we are talking about the test, but we're not helping each other. And she's like, well,
teacher asked, you're not talking about the exam, are you?
It's amazing.
You might disturb others.
You might even if you're not sharing answers, you might disturb others here. So Clark excuses himself. The brothers lure Mr. Drake out of the apartment. They call him. They say, we're calling from the emergency hospital. Your son's hurt. And he falls for this, and he goes outside, and they push him into a car. They knock him out. And their plan is to lay him out in the middle of the road and run him over and make it look like a hit and run. But of course, Superboy arrives on the scene in the nick of time. You were mentioning this earlier. He stops the car. You know, we get some cuts here, right? So we don't see the car getting smashed, but he lands, and then we
through
see
the power of editing. Yes, which is fine. Hey, you know what? I gotta say, the flying effects, they have improved since the Adventures of Superman. I think, we were talking about him being a little more athletic than George Reeves as George Reeves got later in life, and he was spry and athletic in the early couple of years, but he can straighten out his body. You know, John Rockwell, like, because George Reeves was like, hey, you're kind of leaning a little forward there. If you straighten out a little bit, everybody's not Christopher Reeve, not like an aerodynamic hand glider. I get it, right? But I thought, he had a pretty good core strength, nice and straight, and then also the compositing was a little better. There's always that line around George Reeves that you see and everything, right? Even in the color years, in the black and white years both. And then there's a new shot, an angle that we didn't really see on Adventures of Superman, a straight on shot of him flying at the camera. And I'm like, hey, that's pretty cool.
That was cool. I like that. I thought that was dynamic. That definitely it had an effect as he was racing to the situation there. I like that a lot. So he's he saves Mr. Drake, and then we get to our denouement here, where we're back in Chief Parker's office, and we find out that the insurance company. I don't. This all sounds great. I don't know how likely this is, but the insurance company offers Mr. Drake a full scholarship for Jimmy's college, and they offer Mr. Drake a job at their Metropolis office. So this insurance company, they're exceedingly grateful, and they're showing their gratitude with these offers here. But
I assume that would have both been less than the $200,000 they would have had to pay, right? That's probably part of the math.
Yes.
So
that works.
Yeah.
And I guess Mr. Drake has shown his value and his resourcefulness. So they're like, we want this guy.
Yeah.
But he and Jimmy decide to stay in Smallville, and Mr. Drake wants to continue with his art classes.
Mm-hmm.
And then our final scene, we're back in the classroom. The class is resuming their oral reports on my father's occupation. And Jimmy gets up and has such great pride for his father. He's not just a doorman. He's a great man. He's a strong man. He's a brave man. And
smart man.
Just fade out on that. Yeah.
Well, Clark and Lana exchange looks like, look at us. What a job well done. I'm like, what?
I know. It's like, I think the Drakes figured out most of this on their own. You guys did like nothing.
And hey, let's play the game I play and always on Smallville. What day is it? What time is it? So that class ended. All of the events we saw took place were like, between Thursday at 3 p.m. and Friday at, I don't know, 1 p.m. or something, right? I guess it tracks. I think it's all one day. I don't know. They kept cutting back to those criminals for so long. I was like, there's a lot of time passing. I don't know. But yeah, to say like, hey, where did we leave off? That means it's literally the next day.
Right.
So think about that. But you know what? I'm happy for the Drakes. They figured it out. I know on your George Reeves podcast, had some Wayne names, they had some Grayson names. Now we got some Drake names. So just Batman everywhere, right?
Very much so. Yeah. That
referencing the Tim Drake Robin for those of you who are like, what do you mean? So
yeah. Although this would have been ahead of its time. So
that's true. About 30 years.
That would be ahead of its time. But still, you can't help but think of it. But yeah, like we've been saying, I think a solid episode, had this been episode 3 or 4 or 5 in the first season, totally fine. Especially if, and I don't think this was the case, but if Jimmy had been a character we had spent any time with, right? And now you're getting more insight into him and all of that. As the leadoff episode, I think it leaves a bit to be desired, but the pieces are there, right? The setting, the trappings, the faithfulness to the source material. I think it gets the characters, and Superboy and Clark in particular. I mean, I would have loved to have seen what their Jonathan would have been like, and the Kent General store. Like that would have been cool to see, but I don't know. Like overall, it's a bummer to me that this didn't move forward. It would have been cool.
Yeah, I think I was maybe a little more critical of it than you, but even that being said, I would have loved if there was like, hey, you know what? There was a Superboy show that lasted 4 years in the 60s. Oh, great. Like, what did, how long it would take me to get around to watching it? We'll see. Because, but the fact that it would have been there and have been this interesting thing, we could always have these, well, does it fit with the George Reeves show? Well, you look at this episode, they do this and that. And like the conversations that could come of it would be fun. But, is what it is. And I think we can all like rewrite it and all these things. Like, I would have loved to see a scene between Clark and his parents, but like, you know what? Jimmy's dad, blah, blah, blah. You guys, well, son, I've known Jimmy's dad for a long time. And like, it's those scenes write themselves to give you spend some time and give me some insight into Clark and Superboy. And he's not in it a lot. Like I know there's Adventures of Superman episodes where there's not a lot of Superman, but you know what? There's a lot of Clark in those, and there's not a lot of either in this. And that is a weak point, especially when you're trying to sell a show with the title character and he's not in it as much.
I agree completely. And it's funny when you talk about the discussions that fans would have had if this had gone to series about whether they were in the same universe or whatnot. It's the same sort of stuff that we've talked about with respect to Krypton and Superman and Lois about how it's like, yeah, they could fit. Like,
maybe they would have Lex in this, for God's sake. Even for some reason he wasn't in the George Reeves show. His friend Lex. They would not do a season arc, but like, here's friend Lex moves to town, and
I mean, that was right from the comics at the time. So the idea, it's not beyond the realm of possibility. I mean, I don't think it would have been an quote unquote arc like we would
one episode,
want, but him being there and getting bald and like they would have done it. I feel
that's one of the first comics I read like ever. Like, was my dad had these comics and I read it, and it had, you know, the when Luther met Superboy. I'm like, oh wow, this is like some secret origin. This is amazing. Like, you know, when you're a kid, you know, you're like, this is great. I thought I was learning all this secret stuff. Little did I know it was like erased, and never thought it was dumb. Like, it's history I'm holding and reading right here, right? They absolutely, as faithful as this was, and they literally, like, we don't know which came first, but this episode was a comic and vice versa. I gotta think they would have adapted that.
I think so. And the fact that they didn't do Lex on the George Reeves show, it's like there's a wide open lane here.
It would just prove that they're connected. That's my favorite thing about this now. Is trying to connect this to that other show.
The other thing I want to say in defense of this pilot is we know, I mean, we haven't gotten there in the rewatch yet, but we know that the color years of Adventures of Superman, it gets very kid friendly, very silly, right? It loses that gritty noir aspect that we saw in the first season and that we have some remnants of in the second season. I was surprised watching this. They play this really straight. It's not silly. And given that it followed the end of the George Reeves series, I wouldn't have been surprised if this had leaned more into the, you know, kind of the sillier territory. But I'm not saying this is deathly serious. It's not, but they still play it straight. It's not silly. And so the tone of it was kind of like pleasantly surprising to me.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. There was no obvious comic relief character. Like Jimmy and his dad aren't goofballs, and the criminals are just your standard gangster guys you'd see in the first or second season of Adventures of Superman.
Yeah. No fisticuffs, though. That was a disappointment.
No fisticuffs. I mean, yeah, he ripped open a door and he got shot and he got hit by a car. And I don't know. There's three guys. He could have taken on a couple of them.
All right. So real quick, I know you didn't get a chance to read that last chapter with the summaries of those 12 unfilmed scripts, but I did read them. They were interesting. And so I sort of boiled them down to these quick summaries. I'm just going to like rattle through them fast because we're already pushing 2 hours here. So the big fence, there's another rival store that opens up across the street, but they're crooks and they're selling stolen goods.
Yeah.
The game, this was an interesting one where alien invaders show up in a UFO and Superboy faces off against them. He claims that all Earthlings have powers like him to try to get them to back down. And this is the most interesting aspect of this. He pretends that he can't break their ship apart so that they can leave with some dignity and they can call it a stalemate. I like that one.
I like that. I respect that.
The next one, Achilles was a heel. This is the one with Professor Pepperwinkle. Lana time travels and then Clark has to go after her and they're not sure initially where she is. And so they go to multiple places, but ultimately they track her down to ancient Greece and Clark as Superboy has to battle Achilles on behalf of Hercules, who's been injured. So
I like that.
I mean, I don't know how they would have done this. I don't know.
That would have looked so, you know what? The more you read, I'm like, maybe we've got into kitty territory with the aliens. Like that would have looked cheesy probably and you do this. And it's like, it's somebody in a left, they would, you know, I'm a big fan of the original Star Trek show. And a lot of those plots are like, what do we have in the costume closet? We have some World War II uniforms and we have some the Roman uniforms. And maybe that's what inspired a plot like that. Maybe like, well, we got all these sword and sandal movies on the lot. Let's go film over on that set and put on these togas. And there's your Achilles episode. So maybe that was part of the thinking.
Maybe. Next, we have Oil's Well, where fraudulent geologists attempt to fake an oil strike and swindle the townspeople out of their investment. That was interesting. I feel like a grounded one. No pun intended. I feel like they could.
I got to say, I'm loving these titles. I'm loving these.
The next one, this is very just kind of on the nose. The Girl on the Asteroid. This one, this was interesting because this was like almost like a takeoff on Panic in the Sky from Adventures of Superman, where there's an asteroid hurtling towards Earth and Superboy goes to try to stop it. But he finds out it's inhabited. It's actually a remnant of a destroyed planet. And there's a female on there. She's the sole survivor of her home planet. But she turns out to be a robot, and she sacrifices herself to destroy the asteroid because there's kryptonite around it.
Oh, wow. Kryptonite. So early. Okay.
Dude, hang on. We're going to get into red kryptonite in a minute. Hang on.
What? Are you serious? Oh, my
True story.
I'm so disappointed the show didn't get more episodes now. I'm serious.
All right. This next one would not fly today at all. So this one is Super Brave. So Superboy rescues a Native American. They're not called that in the script, but he rescues a Native American camp from a forest fire. The chief is injured and has to be replaced. Gray Elk, one of the other members of the group here, rigs the election and makes the rest of them build a Superboy costume for him. He calls himself Super Brave. Superboy, to keep an eye on this replacement chief, disguises himself as a Native American called Red Pony to keep an eye on them, and he saves them from crooks, and he inspires goodness in this replacement chief. So aspects of this clearly, again,
of its time, but
yeah.
yes, okay.
One-man team. This feels like such a small-scale episode. I'm surprised this wasn't the pilot. The Smallville football team is in bad shape, and Superboy won't play because that wouldn't be fair, but he offers to
That's right, Clark Kent in high school. That would not be fair. Continue, please.
It wouldn't. Well, we'll give Clark his glory run. Things got so dark for him after that. It's like, give him that. But Superboy, he does offer to put on an athletic exhibition to raise money, and crooks try to steal it while disguised as hot dog vendors. The next one is The Box from Krypton, and this is like almost a straight adaptation of Adventure Comics 283, which is the first Phantom Zone and the first General Zod. Where Professor Lang, who would have been a fixture in these episodes, he has this box that he can't open, and it turns out it contains these Kryptonian weapons, including a Phantom Zone projector. Here they call it Dimension X. But yeah, we talked about 283 in our Silver Age discussion. It's like a very close adaptation of that.
So is this the first appearance of Zod?
I don't know. I don't think that this episode would have gotten into Zod. Wouldn't have done Zod, if I'm remembering correctly from the summary now.
I just remember when you were rallying off all the things that came out first in the Superboy comic. I was like, wow, Zod and Record of Night. I mean, I knew Bizarro, but I didn't know Zod especially. Like, was like, wow, okay.
I know. Nor did I before this. That's like, well, this is so fascinating. All right, the last few here. Superboy's new parents. Oh, this one was funny. This one would have been interesting. So there's this So Superboy's testifying in court against bad guys. And this con man writes a letter to the judge pointing out that Superboy is a minor and should have a quote unquote supervised background. So the court assigns this con man and his wife as Superboy's foster parents. And then And then they start selling tickets for people to come see Superboy. It's like a whole thing. But then eventually Superboy proves to the court that he's essentially, the equivalent of an adult based on his mental prowess. But it was just like such a weird setup. The next one here, Superboy out west, Mixius Pitalik. Takes Superboy to the Old West. Takes him back in time to the Old West. Mixie.
That, first of all, incredible they would even attempt that character. I really wonder what he would look like in 1961. But I think that's another case of, hey, we have some Western sets. We have some costumes. They're shooting Gunsmoke and Bonanza over there. Let's just jump onto that train. But that makes sense, right? And Mixius Pitalik is... Man, like, what is it with the Superboy shows doing Mixius Pitalik,
I know. Yes, I know. Where would this have fallen with on the hierarchy? The Superboy TV show, Smallville with McHale.
Probably would have been better than Smallville, Anthony. We both love Smallville, but we both know he's the worst Mixius Pitalik.
Mm-hmm.
I would have loved that one.
Yes, that would have been it. I mean, out of all of these, right, this is the only one that pulled in a villain from the comics. So would have been interesting.
I mean, George Reeves never did it. So
no. All right, our penultimate episode, John Doe Superboy. Here's your Red K episode. Clark, trying to stop this meteor shower, is exposed to red kryptonite, and it makes him lose his memory, which it's like, out of all the things that you can do with red kryptonite, that?
Well, that is a Panic in the Sky thing, though, right? With the meteor shower and the amnesia. So that's probably their version of that.
Yes. I feel like they took Panic in the Sky, like split it into those two episodes, the girl on the asteroid and this. Yeah. So it's like red kryptonite. He loses his memory. And then he ends up in this car with these two Utes who have stolen the car, and they're speeding, and they get apprehended, and they get sent to this state honor farm as juvenile delinquents. And he has to serve out his sentence here, but eventually his memory returns. And then the last one is Superboy versus Superboy. Crooks have this machine that stores up Superboy's energy and uses it against him. Not particularly striking, but yeah, those were the other 12 episodes that were written for this season that never was. Out of all of them, which is there one that you're like, that's the one I really would have wanted to see?
I mean, the Mixius Pitalik one, because,
it has
right?
To be that. I know, just to see what the hell they would have done.
But I was intrigued by some of these other ones too. Not gonna lie, like even that one where the crooks are his parent. Like I'm like, he's a minor. Like that's pretty. You look at the character, like, what can we do? He's a kid. He's a boy. Let's explore that. That's fun. And then that Achilles one, I'd just be really curious to see what they do too. Plus the
Pepperwinkle, yeah.
Pepperwinkle, tying those two shows together. And the Phantom Zone box with the weapons and stuff. I don't know. There's a lot more in there which intrigues me, which I didn't expect. A lot of comic book connections, things like that, and the Kryptonite as well. So, yeah, for as rough as this pilot, or as mid, we'll use a modern vernacular, as this pilot was. Give me these 13 episodes. Even then, it would be an interesting. It'd be like, a Birds of Prey or something, a very interesting show that had half a season and got cut short. And we're all sitting here like, oh, what if it got a full season? What if it got 5 seasons? And we'd be saying the same thing about this, even if it didn't get the whole series treatment. What's so interesting about this production history is, the George Reeves show, they made a whole season before they sold. So it's like, if only they had done that with this, we'd be sitting here talking about 13 episodes of Superboy that were never seen, right?
I know, it's very true. Whenever we talk about these lost, unmade projects, Superman Lives, the Tim Burton, Nick Cage Superman movie is another example. It's you play what if, and I think what's tricky when you look at that movie, for example, it's like, well, if that had happened, what would that have done to Superman Returns, to the DCEU? Like, you don't know, and you play what if.
Right.
Here,
or Batman. Right.
Exactly. I mean, with something like this, it early 60s, again, we're still quite a few years away from Superman the movie. I feel like there's kind of this open, we have animation, we have Filmation, and then we'll get into Super Friends, but on the Superman front in other media, like, it's kind of this open area. So there's this part of me that's like, I don't know if this had played out for 4 seasons or less, or however many, we still could have ended up with what we got after. So I feel like, again, I look at this and am I going to lose sleep over this, brokenhearted that it never happened? No, but it would have been cool. It definitely would have been glad. There was potential here, and I'm glad we got to, unpack it all.
Absolutely. No, and being the Smallville guy, I mean, we're both Smallville guys, but I guess, due to the nature of our podcast, I refer to myself as a Smallville guy. So you understand. So being the Smallville guy, I appreciate you bringing me in and talk about this Superboy pilot. Yeah,
no, I take no offense. I love the show, but I mean, look, you've gone through every episode, beat by beat for years now. So that's something I have not done. I tip my hat to you. And no, that's why I wanted to have you on here for this, even though, again, neither one of us considers Smallville a Superboy show, but still, like, it draws a lot from that aspect, that area or era of the comics. So, to kind of look at this what would have been a true Superboy show is fascinating.
Well, this, and I'm no expert. I've seen a handful of episodes of the 1980s Superboy. I mean, you're becoming more of an expert than anyone during this event. This is far more faithful to what those comics are than that was. I mean, like, he's going to college in Florida. I mean, what are you talking about, right? This is like, you're Smallville, and he's tunneling under the thing, and they have the general store, and it's like, it is exactly the comic books in live action form. And hey, credit to them for that.
Yeah. Like, if you're a Superboy fan, like if you're truly a Superboy fan listening to this and you've never watched this, like you really should. I think you love it. It's the comics. Listen, man, I had a lot of fun with this. I thank you very much for taking part. Obviously, we've mentioned your show and people hear the ad during the episode, but what in particular would you like to share with folks about your podcasting efforts?
Well, as of this recording, we have wrapped season 9 of Smallville, of our episode by episode coverage of Smallville. And we were going to, we go on hiatuses in between the seasons, much like the show did. That's why it's taken me literally 8 years to do this 10 season podcast, and live life in between, do some specials in between, do some good stuff like that. But we will continue on in some form or fashion once we're done with episode by episode coverage. We're not going away forever, but this is, for all intents and purposes, right? This is the log line of the show. Each and every episode of the Young Superman show that ran from 2001 to 2011 on the WB and the CW, and we're almost there. And there's just that 1 year left, and I'm pretty excited for season 10. It's going to be bittersweet, but I hope everybody's excited about it. I know I am. And we're gonna have a lot of fun here in the stretch run. So if you like Superboy, you might like Smallville. The Venn diagram could be all over the place on what you come to these shows or these characters or these versions of the characters for. But hey, 10 years. So in those 10 years, I'm sure there's a few episodes you'd enjoy.
Absolutely. No. And yes, I encourage everyone to check out Always Hold On to Smallville if they haven't already. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, audience. I always appreciate you tuning in. A Superboy fan journey continues next week. Make sure you tune in. And until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Another Exciting Episode in the Adventures of Superman, an episode-by-episode breakdown of the classic George Reeves television show, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.